Chokepoint. An action-packed shadow boxer file. Chapter 1. Zalatan, Southeast Mexico. Southeast Mexico is a weird place. The beaches are gorgeous and undiscovered. Archaeological marvels dot the landscape, and even more are hidden under the green canopy of verdant jungle that stretches down to the border with Central America. The desert marches from Texas and New Mexico, across the flat expanse to butt up against the edge of the jungle to bleed brown scrub and yellow sand into the green thick plant life. Zalatan was a small city on what was generously called a highway that catered to the beach-bound tourists. It was a jumping-off point for tours into the jungle to see monuments of the past, a haven for surfers and wayfarers making an adventurous trip across the continent. Juan's was a dive bar off of a back alley that was simple 4 walls and a tin roof. The bar was made from an expensive-looking jungle hardwood, probably harvested almost 100 years ago, with the smooth sweat-stained top that comes from a lot of elbows and arms propped against the edge. The walls were adorned with cheap beer promotions. The shelves behind the bar had an assortment of shot glasses, beer mugs, and a couple of tequila tumblers. Almost all of them had small cracks or chips. The door was propped open with a chair. The windows were folded up and chained to the roof in an effort to catch any breeze that might stir the fetid air inside. 2 bamboo leaf ceiling fans were connected by a rubber belt, so that when one turned, it caused the other to turn with it. Old worn tables were scattered around the room in no apparent pattern, some with 3 chairs on the sides. 2 men sat at one of the tables engrossed in a chessboard, and an almost empty fifth of tequila that rested between them. Brill Winger was 5'11", and almost forgettable. His face was handsome in a plain fashion, what could be seen of it behind a thick beard. His hair was long and drawn in a ponytail that rested between muscular shoulder blades hidden under a loose white shirt. A man almost his polar opposite sat across from him and glared under a thick brow with piggish eyes. Where Brill was athletic and ripped, Johnson was a man who took his pleasure to excess. He topped the scales at 300 pounds and stood almost 6 inches taller than Brill. He had a balding pate with a fringe of hair trimmed short, and he was clean-shaven. His baby face that made him look younger than he actually was, but the perpetual scowl was meant to keep people away. "You're up," said Brill. Johnson took a shot glass full of amber tequila and slurped it down. He set it on the chessboard, in a new position, among the rest of the empty shot glasses. "Check," he slurred. Brill lifted an almost empty bottle of tequila in a steady hand and tipped the last drops into a shot glass. That was a gutsy move. Johnson mopped his sweaty head with a frayed rag. "I thought you might like it." Brill rolled the bottle across the floor. It clinked against the bar. "Barkeep?" "Another. Who calls them barkeep anymore? You think this is the wild, wild west? What would you call him? Bartender? Keeper of the bottle? Server of the tequila and whiskey and wine? He sets the bar high by keeping the bar to serve us until we're low. Hence barkeep. Pour us another one, we're finished with the other one. You're not gonna need it." That's tough talk from a man in your position. You can only make 2 moves. It's a classic offense. Brill sat up and studied the table with bleary eyes. The grease-stained barkeep gently set a fresh bottle of tequila beside him. "What do you think of this?" The barkeep studied the dirty chessboard and shrugged. He walked back behind the bar and turned up the boombox. He pretended to wipe down the glasses with a grime-covered rag. "What's your name again?" Brill asked his opponent. "Johnson. Cooper Johnson. My friends call me Digger." He stuck out a sweaty paw that Brill shook. It was limp in his hand. "Not Coop." "Nope, Digger. That's what they called my grandfather, and after he died, they said I looked like him, so the family started calling me Digger." "You look like your dead grandfather, Co-op." "I don't know if that's a good thing." "Your mind games won't work on me, friend. I mean, when he was alive. I don't know if that's a marked improvement, Brill smirked. It could be the tequila, though. Let's blame the tequila and save my pride. I can agree to that. Do you know what I do in situations like this, Cooper Digger Co-op? Admit defeat and surrender gracefully. Brill smiled. He uncorked the bottle and took 2 long swallows before he pushed it across to Johnson. I'll be back. Where are you going? Brill grabbed his crotch. Digger, we just met and I'm not that easy on a first date. Johnson waved him off. Clock's ticking. I know. Johnson watched him stumble to the dark hallway that led to the back of the bar. Chapter 2. Brill nudged the bathroom door open with the toe of his hiking boots. The wood, caked from years of greasy beer-soaked fingers, was 3 shades of black where patrons had touched it. It looked toxic. Inside was worse. The small space had a toilet and 2 urinals in a length of 5 feet. It looked like any 2 people doing their business would be forced to stand toe-to-toe to get it done. The floor was an amalgamation of misses, near misses, and deliberate soakings, combined to create a stinking cesspool of waste. A small window, above the back of the toilet, offered the only potential relief. It was edged open. He shoved against it gently and pushed the crack open 2 inches. Brill reached into one of the baggy pockets on the side of his cargo pants and pulled out a sleek pistol. From the other pocket, he produced a 3-inch silencer he screwed on the end of the pistol. He rested the pistol against the edge of the window and peered out at the road. He checked his watch and waited. The bartender banged on the door. Why you got it locked? There's room in there. Be out in a minute, Brill called. He turned his focus back to the window. A long black Cadillac rolled into view. Diplomatic flags fluttered on the hood of the car. The windows were tinted, but one rear window was halfway down. A cloud of cigar smoke filtered out in a blue smog. Brill sighted down the end of the pistol and pulled the trigger twice. A misshapen head bounced against the car window and rested there. The car screeched to a stop. Brill shoved the gun in his waistband and shouldered through the door. Ain't you gonna wash your hands? The bartender asked in a thick accent. Sorry, Brill moved past him down the hall. Chapter 3. Brill strolled to the table and grabbed a shot glass. He swallowed the tequila and set the glass down to a new spot on the board. Johnson smiled as he swilled down a shot of tequila and set his piece in place. Checkmate, he grunted. Brill dropped a crumpled $20 bill onto the table. Good game, he said. Let's make it 2? The front door crashed open, and 4 giant thugs ran through. They were dressed in matching khaki uniforms, huge swaths of fabric stretched tight over giant muscles. They raced toward the back of the bar. Too crowded, said Brill. Maybe next time. He lowered his head and walked slowly out of the door. One of the thugs with a unibrow noticed him and moved to intercept. Brill slipped past him and out of the door. He mingled with a passing crowd of tourists that skirted around the caddy parked half on the curb. The thug tried to find him in the mass of people, but Brill kept his head low and blended in. He made the next corner and turned away from the people. Chapter 4. The phone booth seemed like a quiet oasis in the crowded chaos of the tourist-clogged city street. The side facing the sidewalk had 2 windows missing, so the noise washed over and echoed inside the glass chamber. Brill stood in the booth, dressed like a tourist. His beard had been shaved into a modified goatee, and damp hair curled against his neck. I'm on a landline. Confirm. This is Shadowboxer. Target rendered ineffective. The glass above his head shattered. He ran from the booth, shoved open a shop door. A bullet thudded into his left shoulder. He spun into the room and kicked the door shut behind him. The room was a crowed knick-knack shop full of cheap local goods mass-produced in China. Mountains of T-shirts spilled off wobbly tables, stone and clay renderings of ziggurat, Mayan gods and sea creatures fought for shelf space. Brill shuffled to one of the tables. He grabbed a hooded poncho, an oversized straw hat, a blanket and T-shirt and carried them to the counter. With one hand held close to his side, he fished a $10 and $20 bill out of his pocket and set it on the counter. "No bag," he grunted in Spanish. He used one hand to arrange the poncho over his head and perched the straw hat on his brow. "Is there a back way?" The clerk ignored the register and pocketed the bills. Through the doors. He waved another 20 under her nose. "I'm in the bathroom." She swiped the note and secreted it with the others. Brill moved through the doors. He packed his shoulder with the T-shirt to staunch the bleeding. "Hey," said the clerk. Brill turned, a small 9mm in his hand. She glanced down at the gun and tossed him 2 more shirts, her finger crooked toward a handwritten sign above the table that read, "3 for $10. Special." She winked. He smiled, slipped through the door, hidden under the poncho and a hat. Chapter 5. Brill walked down the alley close to the wall. He stopped at the street and did a scan. Everything appeared normal. A large group of tourists waddled past on their way to a bus. Brill fell in step with them and eased into the center of the crowd. The group bottlenecked at the bus, but Brill moved past them to the next corner and disappeared. Chapter 6. Someone watched the hat and poncho disappear around a corner. 2 men stood on a rooftop several blocks away. One lay prone on the roof, a rifle butt pressed to his shoulder, his eye against the scope. He was in his 30s, thick muscles with a layer of a few years of comfortable living around them. He had sandy brown hair and hazel eyes. The second man stood next to him. It wasn't the most inconspicuous spot to be in. He presented a good target silhouetted against the sky. He held himself with confidence, legs wide as if braced on the deck of a ship. His hair was gray with flecks of black, his eyes were blue, and once upon a time he may have been handsome, though gravity and gravitas conspired to darken his glower. He was trim to the point of being built like a long-distance runner. Corded muscles stood out on his arms and flexed as he tracked with binoculars. "There he goes," said the standing man. "I swear I hit him, Foster." Foster dropped the binoculars to the roof deck. "I've no doubt, my friend. I must have winged him. Or he's got a vest." "Did he wear a vest with you?" "I believe you, Wallace. If you say you hit him, then he is indeed hit. But not down. No. A wounded animal becomes much more dangerous, yes. But wounded we may stand a chance. He will go to ground in a safe house." His voice was cultured and elegant, tinged with a slight British accent. Foster pointed to the crowd below. "After you make a shot, watch the crowd. When you shoot someone in public, the crowd's going to do 2 things. Either they will duck and run for cover, or they're going to run for a look. You do what the rest of them are doing. If you walk away calmly, someone's going to notice. And if they notice, they might tell." The rooftop stairwell door burst open, and 4 soldiers rushed through. They had assault rifles held high and screamed in Spanish. Foster whipped a pistol from behind his back and dropped them with 1 shot each. Wallace glanced up at his mentor. Foster shrugged and held a satellite radio to his ear. "Secured transmission. This is Killjoy. Hut location." "Confirmed," said a tinny voice over the speaker. "We'll deliver. Pack up, we're moving north." Wallace broke down the rifle and stored the components in slim black backpack filled with cut foam. "How confident are you he will go there? What else can he do?" Chapter 7. There are a few vehicles that are iconic in third world countries. Toyota Land Cruisers crisscross the African savanna with reliable regularity. Nissan pickup trucks dot the Middle Eastern landscape like automotive camels. In Mexico, it's the VW. The VW Bug and its counterpart, the VW Bus, putter along Mexican highways and clog up side streets due to huge mass production 2 decades ago, and an interchangeability of parts in the easy-to-repair engines. One of those iconic buses puttered along the edge of a jungle on a dusty highway. Veronica James had one hand on the steering wheel, one leg crossed under the other in the seat, and a perpetual smile. She was dressed in khaki shorts, a button-up shirt, and looked like what she was, a free-spirited archaeology student, still dirty from a dig. The van was packed with the debris of long travel: clothes, a sleeping mat and bag, food wrappers, and a couple of beer bottles that rolled around on the back floor. Ron sang off-key to a song on the radio. She rounded a corner and swerved left to avoid a man on the side of the road. He weaved along the edge, but stuck his thumb out in the classic hitchhiker's pose. Ron slowed down and watched him in the rear-view mirror for a moment. She pulled over to the side of the road and waited. While she waited, she opened the glove box and pulled out a small, dull silver .22 and stuck it under her leg so it was hidden from the door. The passenger door swung open, and the man used one arm to haul himself in to collapse on the seat. "Thanks for stopping," he grunted. "I thought I might have to walk a while." Brill glanced over at her. She studied his clean-shaven face and short, preppy haircut that contrasted with cut-off cargo pants and tourist trap t-shirt under the poncho. He holds a blanket tightly in one arm, the shoulder bunched and stiff. Ron dropped the van in gear and turned the radio volume down by 2. "Where are you going?" "North." She nodded. "That's the direction I'm going. Feel like talking or want a ride?" He leaned against the door and grimaced. "You mind? So long as you don't care about my singing." She reached out, cranked the radio, and belted out off-key rock and roll. Chapter 8. An original Matisse adorned one wall of the office on the 50th floor. There were windows on 2 walls that looked out over the city and the sea beyond. The water below was an emerald shade of green close to the shore that deepened to a blue hue as it went into deeper water. The desk faced one row of floor-to-ceiling windows. It was monochromatic and industrial. The woman behind it was 5'7", trim and muscled. Her hair was meticulously coiffed to highlight strong cheekbones and a delicate neckline. Her lips were full and right now pursed in anger. She clenched a phone in a white-knuckle grip. "You didn't complete your mission." "We winged him," said Foster through the phone. Her eyes flashed in rage, and she wanted to slam it against the desk. "I didn't pay you to warn him. He's on alert now. He'll be impossible to reach." "Negative," said Foster. "He'll move for Baja. We'll wait for him." Her cultured voice did not sound happy. "I'm not a gambler. I don't play games of chance. We'll finish it." She rose from behind the desk and moved with a leonine grace across the floor to a set of shelves. She zeroed in on small 4x6 photo frame with 2 smiling hikers next to a gorgeous mountain vista. It's Maddie and Brill, arms around each other. "I'm freezing the account until it's complete," said Maddie. "That's acceptable," said Foster after a moment. She disconnected the call and set the phone down on the shelf. She picked up the picture and started at it, her eyes lost and misty. Chapter 9. A dark sedan cruised down a dusty jungle road, driving on the edge of too fast. Wallace gripped the wheel in one hand as he lazily adjusted their trajectory. "She happy?" Foster set the phone down between them in the console. "Not yet, but she will be. I don't like this cleanup work." "Neither do I. But we should arrive in the next several hours, and we'll be ahead of him." We'll make an easy job of it and move on." Wallace grunted. They drove up on the bumper of a dusty VW bus, chugging along. Wallace whipped out around it and punched the accelerator. Foster glanced up at the driver as they passed. Ron looked down at him and smiled while she waved. He returned a curt 2 fingers, and Wallace rocketed past them up the road. Chapter 10. Ron patted the steering wheel in time with the music. She fidgeted with the radio, the gear shift, her khaki shorts. She glanced over at Brill. "Are you asleep?" He was lump under the poncho, head lolled against the VW window. "Do you partake?" "Mind if I do?" She reached up to the sun visor and folded it down. A long, thin joint was stuck in a rubber band. Ron stuck one end in her mouth and flicked the lighter open. Brill sat up. "Want some?" He shook his head. "You sure?" She held the lit joint out to him, bumped his shoulder. He grimaced and gasped. "You all right?" "Fine," he said. "You don't look fine." "No way, you don't look good at all." She blew smoke out, and it filled the bus like fog. He cracked his window. "I'll live." She gave him the once over, twice. "Are you one of those macho adventure guys?" "Not that I'm aware of." "Where are you going?" "I thought we were going to ride." She shrugged and took another hit. "Makes the time go by. You're the first person I've talked to in 5 days. I was on a relic dig. Quick stoppa." Brill shifted around, trying to find a more comfortable position. "Anything interesting?" "Hieroglyphs we can't decipher." "What about you?" "Vagabonding." "That's cool. I did that in Thailand for a while." "Particular destination?" "Small place in Baja." "How far are you going?" "It's your lucky day." "I'm going to San Diego." "Keep your cool, and you can stay all the way." Brill held up his hand and showed her an empty palm. "I'm ice cold," he said. "There's water in the canteen." She nodded to the back of the bus. Brill took a deep breath and twisted around to reach for it. His shirt fell open to reveal a blood-soaked tee underneath. "Oh my God, you're bleeding." She pulled the van off to the side of the road. "I'm fine," he grunted. "You look fine," she said. The sarcasm wasn't lost on him. "It's a flesh wound." She tried to move his arm to examine the wound. "Come back here and fight like a man." "Let me see." "I said I'm fine." "I know first aid." "Let me look." He pulled away and leaned against the door. "I'll be okay." She watched him a moment, her eyes calculating. He was pale, but breathing steady. Pain etched lines on his face, and he held his body rock still. "Your funeral," she said. She dropped the van in gear and pulled back on the road. Ron watched him from the corner of her eyes. He licked his lips and grimaced again. She reached back and fished up the canteen to pass to him. "You're going to get an infection." He took the canteen, unscrewed the top and guzzled a long, slow sip. "Thank you." "Let me examine it." "I'll clean it up, stop the bleeding." He rested his head against the window again. "It's fine." "Really?" She didn't believe him. By the look on his face, he didn't believe himself either. Chapter 11. Foster pulled a pistol out of a shoulder holster and began cleaning it with a handkerchief. Wallace concentrated on the road, one hand casually draped across the wheel. "I don't know why you got in this business. It's never pretty." Wallace shrugged. "It's not so bad. It's crap. But it's good money crap. I don't know if that justifies it." "There are certain rules we follow," said Foster. "Did you know that? I bet you never would have guessed we have rules." You want to know what the #1 rule is? Never tell anyone who you are. What happens when you break it? You expose yourself to a certain level of risk. What kind of level? The unacceptable kind. So trust no one, said Wallace. Exactly. Even you. Especially me. Wallace pondered that for a moment as they drove. What about this guy? Do you know who he is? He asked after a moment. Yes. Did you bring him in? Foster shifted in his seat and sighted down the pistol as he aimed out of the window. I found him in Zaire during the overthrow. He told me he was in the Peace Corps before that. Peace Corps training isn't what I thought it would be. He was with the recce. They think he's dead. He stared through the window at the countryside that slid by inches through the glass and thought back to a different jungle. Chapter 12. A jungle stream cut through the thick vegetation. Clear water trickled and tumbled over the rocky bottom. Moss-covered rocks lined the edge. The stream was penned in by high jagged cliffs, gashed with shadows. There is something about the jungle, any jungle that sets a man's nerve on edge. Call it a primal memory, but the dark shadows and breeze-rustled leaves speaks to the lizard brain and calls out a time when man was prey, hunted by apex predators. Man had fought hard to wallow out of the lizard brain, or at least control the response to it. One of those men detached from the edge of the stream bank, an apex predator in his own right. He is covered with jungle foliage, face painted to match the ground, and H&K G3 gripped tightly in his hands. He carefully picked his way across the rocks and moved upstream. 2 other soldiers, similarly clad and armed, appeared in the stream behind him and followed, and then another 2. 5 members of a 6-man recce squad sneaked up the stream. They were on a manhunter mission, tasked with recovering a high-value target that had been taken by rebel forces with assistance from Chinese or Russian nationals. Part of their job was to determine who the rebels were working with on this mission and eliminate that pipeline. The 6th man was further back. He kept close to the edge of the stream bank as he let the ferns and low-hanging branches slip over his utility vest and backpack. He moved slowly, gun pressed to his shoulder. His eyes roamed all over the jungle, his teammates in front of him the opposite bank. He was keyed up, they all were. Their movements were tense, slow and controlled. Brill reached a rock and slipped down in the water. His job was to provide cover fire and keep a sightline on the shadowed defiles that scarred both sides of the stream. It was a great site for an ambush, and the men knew it. They also knew the men they were hunting were aware of it too. Sanders was on point. He reached a fallen log that stretched across the stream and held up a meaty fist. His teammates faded to the edges of the stream, but didn't hide against the banks. He stepped over the log, straddled it. 8 figures popped out of the cliffs, 4 on each side. They opened fire in short, controlled bursts. It was a bloodbath. The rebels had been coached. Under normal conditions, rebel fighters relied on a spray-and-pray method in a firefight, meaning they depressed the trigger and kept going until the magazine emptied. They screamed to ancestor gods, God or Allah, to help make their aim fly true, but none of the deities accounted for blowback which caused the barrels of their rifles to rise. All recce's learned to duck as soon as you heard a bullet, or even a buzzing insect by your ear which could denote a bullet, because the rebels would almost always fire over your head as the barrel lifted. It allowed a few seconds to take aim and fire, and after thousands of hours at the range, a few seconds was all these operators needed. These were not normal conditions. The rebels fired in short, controlled bursts from high ground and decimated the scouting team. Bodies flopped into the stream and floated up against the fallen log. They didn't even get a chance to fire back. Rage washed over Brill. He raised his rifle and prepared to charge, but waited. Something held him back. Perhaps it was the silence of the jungle, or the chattering laughter of the 8 rebel soldiers as they slid down the embankment and started to pilfer the bodies. Brill drew a breath in through his nose, slowly blew it out of his mouth. He lined up on the first rebel's head and inched his rifle through an arc as he practiced the movement. He moved back to the first rebel, a tall soldier that looked like a teenager. Brill popped a round through his eye socket. The rifle barked again, 7 more times in less than 4 seconds. 8 rebel bodies bobbed in the jungle stream. Brill squatted in the water and waited. Chapter 13. Foster rooted underneath the passenger seat and released a Stanley thermos. He unscrewed the top and poured a small cup of café con leche. He sniffed the steam and sipped the hot liquid slowly. He waited until dark, checked the radio. It was shot, ruined. He went to the extraction point. They never showed up. They never found his team. The Russians had a man on the inside of command. Worked with the rebels and the Recce logistics. A double payday. He didn't get a chance to spend it. Brill found him, said Foster grimly. That's why he became a killer? 'Cause no one came to pick him up. What's your excuse? I am a material girl, and it is a material world. That was a song, right? Long time ago. I was trying to keep it to your timeline. Thanks for that, said Foster. So how did you find him? The same way I found you. I found you. Exactly. In our line of work, it's rather difficult to walk up to someone and just ask. Chapter 14. Ron watched Brill from the corner of her eye as they bounced along the jungle road. I can tell you're not asleep, you know, she teased. Your eyes aren't moving. I'm resting, he said. Wake up and talk to me. You pretending to sleep is making me sleepy, and I need to stay up. Help keep me awake. I'll practice my listening skills. My name is Veronica. My friends call me Ron. What's your name? Bob. I'm Bob. Hi, Bob. Glad to meet you. Bob. Is that short for Robert? Just Bob. Parents a little short on imagination when it comes to names, huh? No worries. I'm sure they had other attributes. Did you get your conversational skills from them? From my grandfather. It's an inherited trait, skips a generation. Ha, she laughed and slapped him on the shoulder. Chapter 15. Wallace furrowed his brow, and he glared at the road. But you made me tell you my name. Let's just say I learned my lesson. From him. Him and others, said Foster. He poured a second cup of coffee. You going to offer me any of that? Asked Wallace. I told you to be prepared for the trip. Yeah, but I thought we would stop somewhere along the way. We will stop somewhere along the way, as you so eloquently put it. That somewhere will be our destination. But I'm hungry. Then it is well, I am only drinking and not eating. I'm thirsty too. Forethought is an attribute in our business, and one I recommend you embrace heartily. What would you do if you were in a sniper hole for 4 days waiting for a kill? Wallace gripped the wheel with both hands. His knuckles grew white as he gripped the wheel. I would plan my approach better than waiting 4 days, he snapped. Foster ignored the anger in his voice. So, how long before he told you his name? Wallace asked, after a moment, as he tried to re-engage the conversation. He ignored the tantalizing cinnamon smell of coffee that filled the car. His stomach did not, and rumbled. I don't think he ever has. His name's not Winger. We were driving to a meet in Memphis one time, doing an assignment for the Dixie Mafia as they moved drugs up from New Orleans to Chicago. He was driving, and we passed an exit sign that was an exact match for his name. Brilliant Winger. That's a pretty big tell. I have heard a trace of the South in his voice, but this narrowed the region down. I asked. He did not want to discuss further. Chapter 16. Ron kept one eye on the road, one hand on the wheel, and stole glances out of the corner of the other to see if Brill would stir and keep talking. What do you do in Mexico? Wander. Does wandering pay the bills? How do you eat? He sat up with a stifled groan and studied the road for a second. His head swiveled around to the van, the road behind them, and back to where they were going. Do you always ask this many questions? He tried a grin on, and it felt okay, so he kept it. Knowledge is power, she grinned back. Brill's smile turned cryptic and wistful. She noticed. What? Did you remember a joke? I love jokes. A friend used to tell me that a lot. He must be a smart man. One of the best, Brill agreed. She nodded. I know a few of those. The world is full of great people, if you know what you're looking for. Speaking of great people, we're close to some friends of mine, and I was going to crash with them tonight. There's room for you. They won't mind. Brill flinched as they hit a pothole in the road. I don't want to impose, he sucked in air and gasped. They won't mind, really. It's that kind of place. I'll vouch for you. Just don't be an asshole, and we're good. What if I can't make any promises? He joked. She hit another pothole, and he gasped again. You don't look so good, Mr. Wanderer. I'm okay, he sighed. Ron didn't believe him, but they were close to camp. She decided to save the debate, and pulled off the jungle road to a well-worn path. The jungle pressed in on the small van. She bumped along for 100 yards or so, and Brill cringed with each pothole. He gasped for breath, but kept a stoic look on his face. Ron pulled the van into a semicircle of camper buses and RVs, pulled around a cleared communal area with a fire pit and tables set up under tarps. It looked like a hippie commune transplanted to the middle of the jungle, with long-haired granola people being busy with plants, cooking, and the general upkeep of camp life in the jungle. Brill took it all in through slit eyes. Even the sentries on top of a couple of the campers, who stared out at the jungle with AR-15s and AK-47s held loosely at hand. Home sweet home, Ron called. You live here, he wheezed. Once upon a time, she answered. Chapter 17. They slid into a stop in front of a tiger-striped old school bus from the 70s that had been converted into a camper. Brill noted the men on top of the vehicles as they turned their way, not quite lifting their rifles but wary just the same. Ron hopped to the driver's side the van and greeted 3 people who spilled out of the bus. They wrapped up in a group hug, a tangle of arms and hair and smiles. Brill got flashes of the newcomers. They didn't look like hippies. They were young, grad students maybe, or of that age where idealism met revolutionary fervor and planted the seeds of hope for a change. He had been there once, long ago. They wore khaki fatigues, most likely second-hand from surplus shops or else shipped down by parents or friends from the United States. The clothing was used but not well worn, which meant it had never seen any real action, just traveled from a quartermaster course somewhere and ended up in the jungle. Amigos, he heard Ron shout. Am I familia? She broke away and hugged each in turn, starting with Scooter. Brill dismissed him on sight. He was lean to the point of emaciation, with long stringy hair and a scraggly beard. He tugged at his hair and put the end in his mouth to suck on, as he stared through small round glasses he felt gave him an intellectual air. We wondered where you were, he said in a nasally voice. Hung up and quick stoppa. We missed you, said Dana, a solid squat red head with Irish green eyes and linebacker shoulders. Are you staying? Just for the night, said Ron. I've got a deadline, in San Diego. Stay longer than a night, Scooter pleaded. Can't, hermano. I wish I could. The third was Enrique, a handsome man with a face that hinted of Spanish heritage. "What did you bring us?" "A wanderer like me," she answered. "He's banged up, bleeding. He won't let me look at it, though." Dana's face morphed over to that of a concerned mother. She gazed through the windshield at Brill with soft eyes. "Want me to talk to him?" Brill opened the door, and they watched him as he pulled himself out of the passenger seat and held himself up by the door. He sucked in a breath and stepped toward the group. Scooter extended a sweaty palm. "You are staying with us tonight too, brother?" Brill reached out for the hand but missed. He was surprised. Normally, he was pretty good at handshakes, as simple as they were. And standing. He had years of practice with that. Standing was easy. Just keep your feet apart and braced and balance. So why was it so hard right now? And how was it getting dark so fast? He missed the hand and fell to the earth hard. Chapter 18. The key to waking up in a strange room is to try and maintain the pretense of sleep and allow a moment to acclimate. Brill didn't flick open his eyes or try to jump out of bed or call out. None of the things people do in movies, even though it would seem to be a normal reaction. He became aware of sounds first, coming to him from down a long tunnel. They were muffled voices. He controlled his breathing and slid open his eyes and tried not to squint at the light. The room was gray, with a window that stared out at a brick wall. The steady beep of a heart monitor matched the rush of blood in his ears. The murmurs came from the corner, so he turned his head and cracked one eye open just a little. Foster spoke with a blood-stained surgeon. The doctor was Turkish. A bushy mustache bounced as he explained something to Foster. His scrubs and gown were covered with blood. They both noticed his head move. Foster looked like he hadn't slept for days. His normally meticulous suit was rumpled, bags under his sunken eyes. "Can you hear me?" He nodded. The voice still sounded muffled, but overpowered the rush of blood in his pounding head. "Did I get the mark?" he whispered. He must have said it softly, but Foster still put a hand on the butt of a pistol under his arm and glanced at the doctor. The man hadn't heard. "It's better we discuss that later," said Foster. "You gave us a scare." Brill moved his head back painfully and glanced down at his body. He wiggled the fingers on his right hand and felt them, all 5, and did the same for his left hand and then 10 toes. All was accounted for, and all ached. Foster probably had them ease up on the morphine, just so he wouldn't let a nugget of information slip. His body was wrapped up like the mummy, the bandages tight against his skin. Skin that ached just as bad as his muscles. "Well, doctor?" asked Foster, picking up the conversation Brill interrupted with a shift of his head. "He will recover, I think. We are through the worst of it now. Let us see how he is after some rest." The doctor hurried out of the room, his mind already on the next patient he had to visit. "Success?" asked Brill now that they were alone. "They sent in a kamikaze." "What do you remember?" Brill shook his head, but it hurt too much to move far. Just a micro-movement, really. A fraction of an inch to the left, a fraction of an inch to the right. "You got the mark," Foster answered. He placed a hand on Brill's shoulder. "Get some rest, and I'll be back later." Chapter 19. The world looks different, viewed through crosshairs. It's an extreme example of tunnel vision. A good sniper is taught the power of focus. A great sniper combines speed with precision. Brill leaned against a row of boxes 5 feet back from a window that looked out over a set of row houses in Ireland. The day was gray and cloudy, threatened rain that had yet to fall. He's comfortable in jeans and a canvas work coat, looking like every other blue-collar worker that populated the street below. A couple of young kids played and yelled as they batted around a worn soccer ball. He settled the stock against his shoulder and watched the world through scope, his breath low and controlled. A British Army transport paused in the street to let the kids clear out before it rumbled past. They yelled and flipped off the soldiers. The radio headset in his ear crackled. "Shadowboxer." "Go," he said. "They're breaking up." "Confirmed." "Now go." He shifted the barrel of the rifle to a short, stout young man standing on the corner. He's dressed in jeans and a jacket that looked a lot like what he was wearing. The man started walking away from the building, and just before he turned the corner, he glanced up at the half-open window where Brill was hiding. "Damn it," Brill sighed. He pulled a silenced pistol from his pocket and placed it on a box in front of him. "Spotter," he said into the radio. "Yeah. Go." "You just gave me away." No one noticed. "I swear," the man said nervously. "Abort." Brill studied the street. The kids still played. Walkers walked. Everything looked the exact same. Maybe he had gotten lucky. "Sir?" the spotter asked again. "Negative. Proceed to pick up." He continued the mission. The spotter walked 10 yards up the street and past an alleyway. 2 goons jumped him and dragged him through the trash and behind a dumpster. The taller one, Danny, pulled a pistol from his jacket and shot the young man in the back of the head. Frankie gagged. "For fuck's sake, man, you could have let me step back." He wiped blood spatter off his face and hands. Danny grabbed him by the collar and pulled him close. "You make sure I'm good and gone before you pull, you bugger." Frankie pulled a block of C4 out of his jacket pocket and shoved a detonator into the clay-like lump. "Relax, Dano," he smiled. He was missing several teeth in his freckle-faced grin. "I'm a professional." You're a whiz all right. If I'm gonna die, this ain't how it should happen." "Just move your ass, ya shit. We're out of time." Danny nodded and walked around the corner. He stuffed the pistol into his coat pocket and ducked his head down around the shoulders to disguise himself further. He hunched and tried to limp to hide his gait. Brill noticed the young man dressed like a dock worker limping home after a morning shift. The scope followed him for 10 steps and dismissed him as a threat. Just another lad on the streets of Belfast looking for a pint. The door up the street opened, and he swung the barrel of his rifle to the shadows inside. A black Mercedes turned onto the street and rolled to a stop in front of the steps. The kids playing soccer vacated the road quickly and ran around the corner. A second car pulled behind the first and parked. 6 large bodyguards exited the car and created a wall from the passenger door up the steps with 3 men on each side. Brill moved the scope sight to the car door. It opened quickly, and 3 men hustled out. They all looked similar, same height, same haircut, but each had on a different color suit, black, blue, and gray. Each of them carried a leather attaché case. That confirmed it for Brill. He set the scope on blue suit and pulled the trigger. A hole opened in his forehead, and he jerked back, tossed the attaché case up into the air. It blocked the second shot from hitting Gray's suit. A bodyguard tackled the man and took 2 in the back of the head that puffed out a pink mist as they fell. The bodyguards opened on the building across the street. No one had heard the shots, and they couldn't tell where the shooter was, so they fell back on the old reliable standard of spray and pray. The street bounced gunfire off the buildings. Bullets shattered the window and showered glass across Brill. He jumped up, kicked out the shutters, and popped the 5 bodyguards in black suit with fast, precise shots. Gray's suit crawled out from under the dead weight of the man on top of him. He scrambled for the door of the car and what he hoped was safety inside. Brill drew a bead on his head and pulled the trigger. A noise at the door behind him made him spin. He peppered the wall with shots at just above waist level, stitched a line as someone ran down the hall. They screamed when he hit them. Not yet. Not yet. Brill dove behind the box at the window. The building erupted around him in an explosion of dust and debris. The front end of the wall collapsed and spilled 3 floors out onto the street in a pile of bricks and detritus. Danny ran around the corner and began picking through the rubble. He lifted Frankie's dead body and hefted it over his shoulder. He stumbled away as a dust-covered hand pushes aside a section of broken brick with the tip of a silenced pistol. The hand flopped down. A silver Peugeot slid to a stop by the collapsed building, and Foster jumped out. He ripped bricks and broken bits of building to the side and grabbed Brill. He jerked him out of the rubble and folded him into the back seat of the car as sirens wailed, closing in. Chapter 20. A cloud of gray slowly coalesced into focus as the rim of a glass held by a slender hand. The hand was on a muscular arm that led straight of the shoulder next to a smile. A beautiful smile with white teeth and the hint of a dimple. It was a nice smile, the kind that was used to getting what she wanted and wielded like a weapon. "Drink this," she said. He sniffed the rim. Water, which technically had no smell and was telling in and of itself. Besides, he reasoned, what other clear liquid would a sick man get? It had a probability of being water, unless he was in Russia or Russian hands. Russians thought vodka was a magical elixir designed by the gods of the steppe as a cure-all. He sipped at the edge of the cup and was right. Just water. The tinge in his shoulder made him crave a little vodka, though, if just to numb the ache. He took a larger gulp, and she pulled the cup away. "I'll give you more in a minute," she chided. "We were worried. Do you know how much blood you lost? 3 gallons? Funny. Good to see your sense of humor didn't leak out all over my van floor. Do you know how long I'm going to have to scrub to get out the stains? Surprised you could see it under all the junk on the floor," he groaned. "Jokes, huh? Still got jokes. I think that's a good sign." "Where are we?" he asked and looked around. The walls bent in at the top of the narrow 8-foot-wide space. Sheer curtains covered rows of windows near the intersection of wall and ceiling. "Still at the camp," she told him, and it clicked. He was in the bus or a bus, but which one he couldn't be sure. It was a rudimentary hospital suite, so perhaps these rebels, if he could call them that, or anthropology students pretending at rebellion, had seen an action or two. One side had the cot he was on against a wall, and the other was a series of plastic bins with drawers, the opaque plastic hinting at the medical supplies inside. Ron rolled the sheet down from his chest. It's a mapwork of scars, intricate and delicate, some tiny, some larger. Scars tell a story, or most stories, the good ones at least, end with a scar or two as a memento and reminder of a lesson learned. His chest told of a story that lessons had been harsh. It was yet to be determined what he had learned. "What happened to you?" "Wrong place, wrong time," he answered. "More than one wrong place. More than one wrong time. Did you learn your lesson?" He licked his lips and indicated he wanted more water. She held the glass to his mouth for a sip, then another, and pulled it away. She set the glass down and lifted a flattened bullet. "Who shot you?" The bus sagged as someone stepped on board. The mosquito netting that separated them from the front compartment moved aside, and Enrique stood there. "Is he dead?" "You heard us talking," she said. "Not yet." Enrique moved and stood behind Ron. He stared down at the mishmash of scars and tried to hide a wince. He failed. "How you feel, amigo?" "Thirsty," Ron answered for Brill. "Some of those look pretty old," the rebel nodded toward his chest. "Enrique," warned Ron. "And some not so old, I think." "Enrique," she said again, and this time it sounded like a command. He took a step back. "What?" he grumbled. "I can't ask a question." "He is a guest." She stared him down with icy eyes. "We treat him like any other." Enrique shook his head and pointed. "With a pattern like that, he could be a mole." The bus sagged again, and Dana skittered on board. She flitted to the end of the bus. "Who's a mole?" she asked in her high-pitched voice. "No one is a mole," said Ron. "We haven't established that yet," said Enrique. Dana saw the mess of Brill's chest and yanked a camp stool over to sit next to him. "Oh my God," her voice trembled. "Who did this to you?" Tears gathered in the corner of her eyes as she traced the tip of a rough finger across the network of tissue. Her lip quivered. "They got me too, you know." She unbuttoned her shirt and opened it up to reach the plain white tee she wore under. She lifted the tee and revealed scars across her side and lower back. "They had me for 6 months," she said. "Whipped me. And other things." She dropped her shirt and put her hands on his chest. Her haunted eyes stared into his as she tried to offer comfort. "How long did they have you?" "They may still have him," Enrique snapped. He reached down and gently pulled Dana back from the cot. "No one has me," Brill answered. He struggled to sit up, but Ron pushed him back with one hand. "Who shot you?" "I told you. Wrong place." "Wrong time," she finished for him and held up his pistol. His eyes narrowed as he watched her closely. "This is a company-issued silence," she said. "What company?" She twirled the gun on the end of her finger. "And none of us can guess who modified the gun. We've never seen anything like it." "What do archaeology students know about guns?" he asked. "We know who supplies the policia," snarled Enrique. "The same men that gave you this silencer." "You have to tell us who shot you," said Ron. "Or we'll have to assume a story for you, and ours is a worst-case scenario." Brill glanced from her to the others and back again. She held his gaze, as did Enrique, both itching for a fight maybe. He was, muscles tense, vein throbbing in his neck, one hand clenched in a fist. The other hand was on Dana, who looked at him with sympathy and concern, even as she took a half step behind Enrique. Cautious just in case. At 100%, he could take them. It would take less than 4 seconds. But he wasn't 100%. He couldn't even be sure he was 50% until he moved, and given the situation, he wasn't sure he should move. "Talk to us," growled Enrique. "Talk is overrated," Brill shot back. Ron passed the pistol to Enrique and stood back from the cot. "He's not going to tell us who he works for," she said. "Then that is answer enough." "I can't do it," she said. Dana moved between them and stared down at Brill. "We helped you," she said. "Now you have to help us. Don't make them kill you, please. Are you here to spy on us?" "I'm not a spy," Brill snorted. "How do we know?" asked Enrique. Chapter 21. Foster stood in the corner of the roach-infested motel room. The carpet was stained with dark blotches from years of abuse. The walls were a Jackson Pollock painting of browns and mold and gunk. The furniture was third-rate, bought second-hand from another flophouse that was going out of business due to too many murders. There were 2 beds, though, large, saggy, and lumpy and private. A pay-by-the-hour affair that promised a clerk who paid 0 attention to the 2 men as they checked in, one in the parking lot in the car, and the other wearing glasses into the smoke-choked front office. Foster flipped one of the saggy mattresses against the wall. "Never point a pistol across the room," he instructed. "It's made for close-range work." Foster moved in front of the mattress by the wall. "Shoot at my head once." Wallace raised an eyebrow. Foster nodded. "Go on." His protege reached into his jacket, pulled a pistol out of the shoulder holster, aimed and fired. Foster shifted his head left. The bullet puffed into the mattress with an explosion of feathers and a dull thud. Wallace stared at him, dumbfounded. If you can't surprise a mark, he can move out of the way. Success in our business can be measured in centimeters. How did you do that? I watched your finger. The knuckle goes white as the muscles contract. A trigger takes less than a pound of pressure, but there is a tell you're always on the watch for. Foster pulled his pistol from the holster and aimed it at Wallace. "Allow me to demonstrate." He pulled the trigger. Wallace threw himself across the bed as the pistol drive fired. "Holy shit, you almost shot me." "Observe," Foster said in a cool, calm voice. He aimed the pistol at Wallace's face again. The firing pin clicked and clicked and clicked as he showed the younger man how to watch the finger change color. Chapter 22. The tip of his finger turned purple, and the knuckle shifted over to white. Brill jerked his head to one side as Enrique pulled the trigger. A puff of feathers erupted out of the pillow. Brill kicked Enrique's hand against the wall, jackknifed out of bed and grabbed his arm. He twisted Enrique's wrist and popped the gun loose. He spun the rebel around and slammed him into the side of the bus, caught the pistol, and crammed it into his neck. "I told you I'm not a spy," he coughed. He winced and slumped against the bed, but held the gun steady. Enrique pulled himself up, massaged his throat, massaged his arm. His hand moved back and forth as he tried to make up his mind which hurt worse. Neither injury burned more than his pride, though. "Damn," whispered Dana. "You pulled some stitches." Brill felt the syrupy stickiness of blood as it oozed down the back of his shoulder and arm. Dana grabbed the gauze. "May I?" He nodded and leaned the injured shoulder toward her. "How did you do that?" Ron asked from 2 steps away. The confines of the bus were tight, but she still managed to wedge herself closer to the door. "Practice," hissed Brill as Dana pressed on the pucker wound. "Lots of practice." "I don't trust him," Enrique groaned. "You shouldn't," said Brill. "But you're not going to kill me for it." Chapter 23. Snowmelt turned the rocky trail into a muddy slog up the side of the mountains. The path was overgrown, hardly used, but the 2 hikers didn't seem to care. They laughed and giggled as they picked their way upwards. A majestic landscape surrounded them as they stopped to take in the view. Snow-capped peaks hovered in the distance, higher than their elevation, and aspen woods stretched across a wavering tree line just below them. They could have kept going higher if they had the proper gear. Above them, the path veered to the left and twisted around the western edge of the mountain they climbed. A spring bubbled from somewhere further up, a trickle that carved through the rock to grow bolder and larger below. They stopped at the stream at a crevice. Here it was wider than 6 feet, too hard to jump. The melting snow and ice had turned the trickle into a steady flow. "I don't want to get my feet wet," she said. Brill sat on a rock and pulled off his boots and socks. "Hop on." "I don't know if I can trust you." He smiled over his shoulder at her and took a step out into the water. "You probably shouldn't." His grin was infectious. "It's cold. I can't wait forever." "What if you drop me?" she teased. "I promise." He winked, his smirk promising that he might. She laughed and shook her head. "Take a chance," he shivered. That did it. She took 2 quick steps and launched herself at his back. He staggered, not because of the weight but the speed with which she latched on. He recovered and carried her across the stream in a few quick steps. "No worries, right?" he said as he set her upright and put his wool socks and hiking boots back on. She bent down, grabbed his face, and kissed him long and deep. It was a good kiss, full of potential and promises. He didn't want her to pull back, but she finally did. "I always worry," she smiled. She continued slogging up the mud trail. He tied off his boots and marched after her. Chapter 24. They saw the steam before they wandered over the crest. It made a fine layer of fog that drifted across the ground and floated down the trail. The hot spring was a geothermal event where the stream intersected a vent in the rocks. The stream created a series of pools that cascaded down the rocks. Brill sat on a rock and slipped out of his hiking boots again. He began to strip his jeans. "Get in," Maddie laughed. "Wait for me." He slid over the edge of a rock and eased down into the scalding water. "Where are you going?" She slung her pack over one shoulder and traipsed down the path. "Little girl's business." She disappeared through the trees. He watched her go as he relaxed into the water. Chapter 25. Maddie glanced over her shoulder when she hit the trial. Brill was up to his neck in the pool, eyes closed as he lounged. She shifted up on her toes and sprinted through the woods, trees whizzing by in a snow-covered blur. She spied the ridge off to the side and darted between two evergreens to angle up the edge. She reached the precipice and threw herself down on the ground as she slung her pack in front of her. She whipped out a monocular and peered through it. A pristine slope slid into view. She laid the monocular down and began to assemble a rifle from her pack. She slid the barrel into the stock and locked it down, twisted a shoulder mount into the stock, and set it against her shoulder to lock it. She glided a scope onto the slide and tightened it on predetermined marks. Then she peered through the scope, tracking the edge of the slope in the distance. A figure topped the slope and whisked down in a spray of snow. It was followed by another skier, both in bright pastel colors that were requirements in the backcountry. It would be easier to pick out a body against the snowy white backdrop in case there was an accident. Maddie tracked the first skier in his powder blue jacket. She noted the pattern he was cutting, a 4-count breath as he held a line, 1, 2, 3, 4, turn, and then again. She confirmed the count with 2 more twists in the snow, then counted down with him as she watched through the scope. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The skier turned and she pulled. Poof! He sprawled in the snow and kept sliding. She sent another shot through the bobbing head as it bounced across the snowpack. Maddie rolled away from the ridge and grabbed her pack. She sprinted back down the trail, disassembling the rifle as she ran and tossing parts into the woods off the path. She skidded to a halt just before the break in the trees around the pool and seductively swaggered toward the pool. "Did you miss me?" she smiled at Brill. Her fingers unzipped her jacket and let it fall. They moved to her shirt and pants as she left a trail of clothes to the rocks and slid in beside him. Excruciatingly, he sighed as he wrapped his arms around her and pulled her close. Chapter 26. Brill crawled out of the hiker's tent and stretched. The sun had yet to crest the mountain behind them, but light filtered through the shallow valley next to the steaming springs. "Coffee," said Maddie as she stood next to him and wrapped her arms around his waist. "I packed a French press," he answered. "Put on a kettle while I pack our gear." They broke camp as they boiled water and made 2 steaming cups of coffee which they sipped while sunlight dripped over the ridge and washed through the trees. "Did you enjoy yourself?" she asked. He reached for her hand. "We should take more trips like this," she continued. "Plan it," he winked. They rinsed out the cups, packed up, and hiked down the trail. A mile later, he stopped and raised a hand. "What?" He raised a finger to his nose and drew her off the trail. Footsteps marched up the steep trail toward them. 3 Austrian soldiers slogged up the trail, rifles held in their hands. "It's just soldiers," she said, and stepped back on the trail. The 3 men stopped. They didn't raise their rifles, but tension lined their faces. The leader of the group was Hans, the man on point. His face was young, barely out of his teens, and he licked his lips in a nervous habit. "Papiers bit?" he asked. Maddie reached into her pocket and pulled out her passport while nodding to Brill. "They want our papers." Brill handed his documents over. "What are you doing here?" Hans continued in German. "We found the hot spring and spent the night," she answered flawlessly. She cuddled her arm through Brill's and pulled him close. He watched the exchange with alert eyes. "It is not permitted to sleep the night." "Who said we slept?" she answered. The two young soldiers behind Hans snorted and giggled. "Have you seen any others?" asked Hans as he handed their papers back. "We haven't." Hans studied Brill for a moment, and something made the hairs on his neck stand up. "Do you speak German?" he asked. Brill shook his head. Hans watched them both for a moment, but they looked like a young couple in love out for a hike. "No more nights here," he warned. Maddie flashed a brilliant smile. "Thank you," she said. She led Brill further down the trail. The soldiers continued the climb up. "What was that about?" Brill asked, glancing over his shoulder to watch the three young men disappear over the ridge. "I have no idea," she shrugged. Chapter 27. Tourists descend on every part of Paris like schools of piranha in a feeding frenzy. The West Bank held a special place in their hearts, with echoes of Hemingway and Fitzgerald sounding in the shadows. Artists followed, young people hoping some of the magic in the atmosphere would somehow leach through their skin. They competed with tourists for space in the small cafes and sidewalk bistros during the day and evening. Morning was the best time for locals or the few Parisian visitors in the know. Before the buses vomited visitors onto the cobblestone streets, before the hotels stopped serving warm croissants and giant mugs of au lait. Brill sat on one side of a small table and stared at the outline of Notre Dame. Foster was across from him, a delicate cup near his hand. "Are you going to tell her?" he asked. He studied Brill carefully. "Would you?" Foster smiled and took a sip, careful not to spill any coffee onto his white pinpoint cotton shirt. "I'm not the man to ask, son. I'm working on wife number 3. Do any of them know? As far as the world knows, I manage investments." Foster waved one finger over for the waiter to bring a refill. "Not bad work, if you can get it." "She might not understand. It's not like I'm saving the world." Foster nodded. "The thing about working with a man in this line of work for more than a year, you get to know them." When he found Brill in Africa, the boy was a stone. He had all the skills, he had the requisite brutality, and he had killed before many times. It was in his eyes. Foster was the sculptor, taking tool to rock and chipping away everything that was unnecessary to make a work of art. No, they didn't save the world in the usual fashion. There were no capes, no treaties, no daring heroics into burning buildings. He couldn't even lie to himself about what they did. They killed people for money. He tried to steer them toward killing the right people, but a moral compass could point in any direction for enough cash. He didn't even bother to try and fool himself with any other platitude. "No, we don't save the world," he sighed. The two men smiled at each other across the table and said at the same time, "Pays great, though." Brill perked up, and Foster felt his pulse quicken. The man sitting across from him was a predator and scented prey. He pulled a few euros out of his pocket and set them on the table. "My treat," he said as he stood. He took a large overcoat from the other chair and draped it across his arm. He reached into a shoulder holster and pulled a silenced pistol out, hid it under the coat. "Don't tell her. We live in a different world, you and me." Foster turned, and as he turned he pulled the trigger twice. Across the street, a rotund man with a wispy blonde woman on his arm pitched forward and collapsed. The woman screamed as the man leaked blood on the cobblestones. Brill jumped up with the crowd. It was easy to tell the heroic hearts from the sheep. People ran in two directions, some for cover and away from the noise. Others ran to aid the fallen man. "You may be right," Brill said. "You'll see," Foster answered. Brill moved with the crowd in one direction, while Foster slipped away in the other. There would be no tourists on this street today. Chapter 28. The ballroom was packed with beautiful people in Armani suits and couture gowns. They spun around the small dance floor, in front of a tuxedo-clad orchestra led by a small man bouncing a baton and smiling over his shoulder at the swirling couples. The room was dark, pools of spotlight casting harsh shadows, the tables lit by candles and wall sconces dimmed to pinpricks. Brill marched through the crowd, eyes scanning as he moved. He slid between the tables and couples, avoided contact as he moved like a predator through the herd. He caught sight of something in his periphery and paused as he glanced over. There was Maddie, leaning across a table and laughing softly into the ear of a man in a white tuxedo jacket. Brill turned and angled toward the bar as he tried to stay out of her line of sight. She turned away from the table, and he rolled into the bar. He could see her in the reflection of a small mirror set above the glassware. A young, pretty bartender hurried down to him. "What can I get you?" "Bourbon," said Brill, his eyes locked on the mirror. 3 fingers. She poured the drink and slid it to him. He held the glass to his lips, but didn't sip. Maddie moved to the next table, put her hand on the shoulder of the man, and bent down to whisper to the woman. Brill caught sight of another man moving through the crowd. He is impeccably dressed, with a rim of silver-gray hair and groomed beard. Brill watched the man reach his table and grab a well-endowed young woman by the arm. When he jerked her out of her seat, there was almost a show as everything rolled around and threatened to spill from her top. She glared at the man, but he ignored her. Brill swallowed down his drink and set the glass on top of the bar with a $20 bill underneath. He glanced at Maddie, waited for her back to turn, then pushed through the crowd again. He made the foyer before the bearded man and the girl. He leaped across the counter into the coat check room and spun as he landed. "Take a break," he said to the coat check girl. "You're not supposed to be back here," she warned as she backed away. "I slipped," said Brill. "I'm getting the manager," she shouted. Brill held a finger to his lips. She fumbled for the doorknob and tried to yank it open. He stubbed it closed with the toe of his polished shoe and grabbed her wrist. Twisting gently, he directed her to the floor. "Sorry about that," he whispered as the bearded man walked up with a haughty air. "Get in the car," he slurred to his companion and shoved her toward the door. He tossed a claim ticket down on the counter and glared at Brill with bleary eyes. "I'm in a hurry." Brill reached for the ticket as the bearded man turned his head to watch the girl leave. Brill kept reaching until he grabbed his lapel and yanked him across the countertop. He dragged the man into the coat room and pressed a silenced H&K into his chest. The man landed with a plop, and Brill thudded 2 slugs into his chest. He vaulted over the counter and walked through the door. As it closed behind him, he heard the gurgling scream of the coat check girl echo through the foyer. It sounded just like a woman with a dead man's head in her lap. Chapter 29. A standoff is pretty standard in the world of espionage, and it usually ends with both parties backing off or backing down. If every encounter ended with a shootout, there wouldn't be anyone left alive, or worse, create a series of cascading grudges and revenge hits. There are 2 ways to react in any standoff situation. Hold your ground until the other guy blinks, then magnanimously allow everyone to holster their weapons and get down to business. Or wait for a distraction and take full advantage. Brill preferred the distraction method. The bus tilted slightly as Scooter stepped on board. "How is he up?" he called from the front of the bus. He fumbled with the AK-47 strap, struggled to bring it to bear. Brill drew and shot the rifle out of his hands. Scooter yelped and held both hands high above his head. "Holy crap, man," he screamed. "What is it with you people?" Brill shouted at him. He waved everyone back with his gun. Blood leaked from his shoulder as he moved, and he leaned against the bed trying to stay up. Ron showed him her hands, palms out, as she stepped closer. "Who are you, dude?" she said in a soft voice. "I mean, if you're not a spy for the federales, you have to be a mole for the U.S. You shoot like Quick Draw McGraw." Brill cracked a tiny smile. I watched that when I was a kid, he grunted. Want to trade secrets? Ron said, as she took one step closer. We tell you, you tell us. Brill glanced at the scarred rifle resting on the bus floor. None of my business, he said. The bus tilted again, as another member of the commune shoved his lanky head into the door. Federales. Scooter followed him out, as the camp exploded in activity, like an anthill kicked over. People ran around, grabbing weapons and supplies, and hightailed it into the jungle bush. I told you not to trust him, mumbled Enrique. Brill stuck his pistol into the waistband of his pants. Not mine, he said. You were followed. The group of people surrounding him looked anxious to run, but even more afraid he would shoot them in the back if they made any sudden moves. They knew how fast he could draw. Move, he commanded. Move. Dana scrambled for the exit as Ron leaned back to let her pass. Enrique stopped by Brill and growled. I won't forget. Take it up with you later, Reek, Brill smiled. Enrique shoved past him and bent to grab the fallen AK. Leave it, commanded Brill. Enrique glared as he left the bus and ran into the jungle. Are you with them? Brill asked Ron. What are you going to do? He checked the clip in his pistol. Think I could talk my way past them? A half-smile played across her luscious lips. You don't know where you are. I didn't think so. He bent over to scoop up the AK and collapsed with a groan. Ron grabbed him and helped him sit up. You're not so good at the talking, she teased and helped him to his feet. Are you going to be okay? It's just a flesh wound, he said in a fake British accent. She smiled and half carried him out of the bus. Overhead, an ancient Huey helicopter buzzed over the treetops as it circled the clearing. A Solider, on an M50, leaned out of the open side and raked the jungle with bullets. Ron stopped and reached for Brill's pistol. He leaned away, raised the AK, and shot the helicopter motor. Smoke poured from the engine cowling, and the chopper whirled away with a high-pitched whine. We need to move, she said, and dragged him toward the thick undergrowth. Chapter 30. Maddie sat back in her chair with the phone pressed to her ear. She nodded twice. I understand, she said into the receiver. She pulled it away from her ear and slammed it into the phone base so hard it cracked in half. She spun her chair around and stared out of the window. The skyline was beautiful, a collection of silver skyscrapers that towered over the green verdant landscape. Mountains blurred the horizon, and she glared at those in particular, hating the way remembering made her feel. She slowly turned the chair back to the desk and reached into the drawer. Maddie pulled out a Glock 17, checked the magazine and chamber. Chapter 31. Foster sat across from Wallace and stared. No matter what anyone said, the man could eat. He had a plate full of 2 burritos, 3 tacos, and a tamale. He ate like a man who learned chow from the army, hunched over his plate, each arm in a circle in a protective perimeter. The right arm shoveled, the mouth chewed. At least he kept it closed. One of the things Foster detested were poor table manners, which were so abundant in the parts of the world where he operated, it made him perpetually queasy. It helped him stay thin. You better watch your figure, he warned. A man in our business has to keep fit. Wallace shoveled a forkful of burrito into his mouth and chewed methodically. He swallowed and patted his trim stomach. I've got a fast metabolism. So did I, Foster sighed as he let the man focus on his food. Chapter 32. Brill and Foster stood across from each other in a narrow, unlit doorway. The street beyond them was dark, thanks to 3 well-placed and silenced shots from Brill's pistol. They wore matching dark overcoats against the chill night air, and to help blend into the grime-covered brick of the buildings. Do you want to know what they do in there? Does it matter? Foster reached under his coat and extracted a backpack. He held it out to Brill by the straps. We counted 19 under an hour ago. No one has came nor went. Want some help? Brill opened the backpack and pulled out 2 silenced pistols. He worked the slides and checked the mags. Each was full, with 1 chambered. 32, he said. No problem. A truck pulled into the far side of the street, headlights washing across the walls. They ducked further back into the doorway. Brakes squealed as the truck crunched to a stop in front of a doorway up the street. 6 men climbed out of the truck and shuffled up the stairs. They were dressed in what Foster referred to as gangster leathers, the ubiquitous black leather coat that left them formless and shapeless, enough to cover their weapons. 25, he said. 32, Brill smiled at him. Plus a backup piece? Would you have taught me any different? Foster nodded and pulled a pistol out of his pocket. He held one gloved hand over it, but kept it free. I'm here, he said. Just in case. Brill nodded once and jogged across the street to the doorway. Foster lifted a wrist to his mouth and spoke into a hidden microphone. Does it work? Brill wiggled his jaw and twisted his head to one side to seat the earpiece better. You tell me. Loud and clear, Foster answered over the earpiece. Brill pushed through the door and walked down a dark hallway. 3rd floor, last room, said Foster. Brill hit the stairs and moved up quickly, taking 2 at a time. I'm watching, Foster said from below as he monitored with an infrared monocular. He spied 2 outlines standing where the stairwell ended on the 3rd floor hallway. 2 bodies, top of the stairs, he called out. Brill pulled the 2 pistols from his pockets and moved up the last flight of stairs 1 step at a time. He moved like a lion slowly approaching prey. One of the guards must have heard something and peeked over the railing. Brill raised the pistol and shot him through the mouth. The body dropped on the rail, and gravity fought to pull it over. Brill rushed the last 4 steps and hit the hallway at a dead run. The second guard was running for the last doorway. Brill sent 2 silenced rounds into his back and watched him thud to the floor. He approached the door and listened. It was quiet. He expected to hear talking, the noise of the television, other sounds of a room occupied, but the silence was telling. They heard him, or they had been tipped off. He leaned around, kicked the door open and ducked back behind the wall. Shots erupted through the open door and peppered the plaster across from him. In a lull, Brill rolled around the opening and shot once with each pistol. 2 men dropped. Bullets blasted the wall behind him and stitched a pattern above his head, showered him with white dust. He jerked around the edge of the door frame and dropped the machine gunner and another man. 11 men shot at him, but he rolled out of sight. He needed a distraction, but didn't to call up Foster. As if thinking of him summoned the man, he called over the radio. Situation under control. One of the men grabbed the machine gun and sent an entire magazine through the wall. Sounds like it, said Foster. Brill pulled out his backup piece and tossed it through the door. Grenade, he screamed and ran in after it. All the men in the room saw was a shape soaring through the air and someone yelling grenade. They were military trained, so instinct kicked in. When you hear grenade, you duck. Even as they ducked, they saw a shadow move into the room. Brill shot left and right, each bullet finding a mark. 4 men ran through a side door and kicked it closed. Brill moved to one side of the door and leaned down against the wall. Foster watched from below as the red bodies in the monocular slowly shifted toward blue. Good work, he said. 5 in the next room. They're waiting. Thanks, said Brill. He glanced at one of the dead men, grabbed the body, and propped it against the door frame. He kicked open the door and held the body in place as bullets slammed into it. He shoved the corpse inside and slid under it, shooting as he crawled. 5 shots, 5 men down. He rolled from under the body and scanned the room with his pistol. Uh-oh, he breathed. The room was empty with 2 sets of thick double doors on opposite walls. Brill makes a complete circle from one door to the other. "What is a-oh?" asked Foster. "What do you see?" Brill took a step back toward the door. "I have nothing." "Find them," Brill shouted. One of the double doors opened both sides, and he spun toward it. Bodies spilled out, shooting. Brill fires back, drops low, and runs toward the men pouring into the room. They trip over the first wave of bodies he dropped, but more are behind them. One pistol clicked dry. He sidearmed it into one of the men, scooped up his backup piece, and kept firing. Each shot hit a man and dropped him, the tremor and gore spraying back onto the man behind him. The viscera cause a second's hesitation, but that's all Brill needs. He shot through the wave of men until both pistols ran dry. He rolled and slid across the floor to their fallen pistols as the second set of doors released more. Brill crawled over the bodies and used them as shields. Bullets thunked into the meat, covering him with blood and matter. One hand dropped an empty pistol and searched around for another weapon while the second hand kept firing. His fingers closed over a sawed-off shotgun. He yanked it up and began pumping shell after shell into the mass of gangsters across from him. Foster heard the roar of the shotgun. He yanked the receiver from his ear and ran to the building. He took the stairs 3 at a time. The shotgun ran dry. Brill swung it into the crowd. A man shot him. He spun away and kept rolling, picking up pistols and firing as he went. He made one of the doors and ducked behind it as bullets shredded the wood. One of the guards ran up and peeked around the door. Brill reached up and jerked him down, snapped his neck. The last 5 guards spread out, weapons held ready. They crept toward the door. Brill patted the dead man's pockets, his lap, searching for a weapon. The guards moved closer. The lead man raised his hand to give the command to fire. Foster ran through the door and dropped them all with 5 pops. The room is full of smoke and blood, the bodies of almost 50 men splayed and twitching. Sirens echoed on the distant street. "Shadowboxer," Foster called out. Brill pulled himself around the door and lurched to his feet. His left arm dangled uselessly from a shoulder wound, aggravated by the rolling around. "No problems?" Foster asked. Brill towed one of the bodies over so they could see its face. "I got him." Foster looked around and hooked his arm under Brill's shoulder. He led him down the hallway. "More than 19, he commented. "I improvised," said Brill. They exited into the street and detached so they wouldn't draw any attention as they slowly walked away. "You need a doctor," said Foster. "It's just a flesh wound," said Brill. Chapter 33. Brill leaned heavily on Ron as they pushed through the thick jungle vegetation. They followed a game path, but the brush was worn low closer to the ground. Birds and insects screamed and hummed in the hidden shadows. They could hear the crunch of bodies crashing through the jungle behind them as soldiers pursued them in the undergrowth. They pulled away from the noise as Ron steered them off the path and deeper into the jungle. Brill gasped as she propped him against a tree. "We need a doctor," she said. "Can you make it?" He nodded and froze. A young soldier, barely out of his teens with wisps of a mustache on his upper lip, held a shaky AK-47 in sweat-slick hands. "Alto," he said. Brill held out the rifle in his hand and dropped it. The soldier nodded. "A key," he shouted. "A key." "The safety's on," said Brill. The teen tilted his rifle to check the safety. Brill lashed out and jerked the gun from his hands. He slammed the butt into the teen's face and knocked him down. Brill spun the rifle around, pressed the barrel against the fallen man's chest, and shot a muffled round into his heart. "Hey!" shouted Ron. He shrugged and pointed to the other rifle. "Let's get moving." "He was just a kid," she said as she scooped up the rifle and followed. "A kid that would have killed us without a thought. And he gave away our position. You could have just knocked him out." "Have you ever killed anyone?" he stumbled. She slid under his arm and kept him moving forward. "He was so young." "They all are," answered Brill. They moved deeper and deeper into the jungle, until Ron spied a vine-covered structure hidden under a fallen tree. "Ruins," she said. "Looks like a temple. We can lay low." She led him to the black opening and stripped away the vines and growth that covered the walls. The stone was gray, moss covering the intricate weather-worn hieroglyphics from hundreds of years ago. He picked up a branch and beat the inside of the doorway. It was a perfect hiding place for snakes, spiders, and any number of jungle creatures that could have made a den. "I wish we had a flashlight," he said. They slipped inside the temple room. It was small. The walls extended roughly 12 feet back, with a low ceiling that made him duck. Sunlight leaked through in shafts, but the floor was mostly dry. Brill slid down the wall and collapsed. "We can risk a small fire after dark," he said. "We just need wood." Ron stepped back outside and gathered a few fallen branches. She returned with an armload and set it further back in the ruins. "They're still out there," she said as she slid down the wall opposite of him. She cradled the rifle in her lap and watched him. "We'll wait," he said. He closed his eyes and breathed in for a 4 count. He held the breath for a 4 count and slowly pushed it out. The pattern established, he did it again. In 4 hold 4, out 4 hold 4. He repeated it 20 times. The meditative trance allowed him to assess the damage. They were hunted in the jungle, on the edge of being lost since they were so far off the trail. He was shot in the shoulder, but the wound was through and through. The biggest danger was infection. The sweat and heat were a breeding ground for all kinds of nasty bacteria that would kill him just as well as a bullet. They needed antibiotics and clean dressings and water. The slow blood loss was making him lightheaded. But they were alive and armed. He finished the meditation and opened one eye to glance at Ron. She leaned her head back against the stone and watched the temple opening. Brill closed his eyes and tried to snooze. Chapter 34. Wallace sprawled across one of the double beds in a cheap hotel room, one hand on his stomach, and snored. It was a low, annoying sound that penetrated the ear like the buzz of an insect. Foster sat on the other bed, one arm thrown across his eyes as he tried to ignore the snoring. He considered smothering the man with a pillow. A knock on the door sent Wallace rolling across the bed. Foster sat up and pulled his gun. "Expecting anyone?" Wallace shook his head and pointed his pistol at the door. Foster moved to one side of the door and reached to the doorknob. Wallace shifted left to cover him. They locked eyes and nodded. Foster mouthed 3, 2, 1 and yanked the door open. The doorway was empty. A single female hand reached around the frame and waved. Maddie shifted through the doorway and stared at Foster. "I thought you retired," he finally said. He motioned her in and closed the door behind her. He walked across the room and planted his back against the wall. Foster watched her while he pulled out a handkerchief and wiped down the barrel and handle of his pistol. Maddie sat on the bed and crossed her legs. "We're still on schedule." "Hands on management," she said. "I just can't stay out of it." She pulled a pistol and handkerchief and matched the older man's movements. "Why are you still at it?" Foster watched her work on the gun, making sure the barrel never drifted toward him. "Are you here to contract me?" Wallace shifted on the bed and set his gun in his lap. "Your knuckles are white," she nodded to Foster. "He doesn't look." "You can look," she said. "I won't shoot." Wallace leaned forward and pressed the barrel of his pistol into her nest of hair. I'm not your mark. Lay it down, he growled. Foster began cleaning his gun again. Let it go, son. She could have had us both before you pulled the trigger. Wallace let his pistol drift away, but watched her closely. One move, and he would be ready. She's strapped on under her right arm. The gun in her hand is empty. She'd show you that one, shoot you with the other. One of the better tricks you taught me. I learned it from him. The two of them worked in silence, each mimicking the other's movements of cleaning and wiping down their pistols. Wallace's stomach growled, breaking the silence. Anyone else hungry? Maddie glanced at him from the corner of her eye. You tell him about waistlines? He says he has a fast metabolism. It will catch up with you, she warned. What doesn't? The big man shrugged. They serve pizza around here. Burrito stand 3 buildings down. Man, I hate Mexico. I'm sick of burritos. He stood up from the bed quickly and tucked his pistol into the waistband of his pants. You say she's safe? I didn't say that, corrected Foster. So, I shouldn't leave you alone with her. Foster smiled over the tip of his pistol as he sighted on the wall. I think we can manage. Want one? Thank you, no, said Foster. Watch your head. Wallace patted the bulge at the small of the back and squeezed through the cheap hotel door. Maddie listened to him as he lumbered down the exterior walkway. He won't last long. He can shoot. How did you find him? He came on a referral. I thought it was you. No use for his type in my company. Want to play? I'm too old to play. She went to the window and slid the curtains aside with the barrel of her gun. He needs the practice. Foster watched her back, the strong lines of her shoulders under the Armani suit, the movements like a lithe panther. Were you contracted for him? I wouldn't tell you. If you hit him, I'll tag you, he warned. She turned to him, a grin splitting her face. That means you want high. She pulled the door open, peeked out and ducked back in before exiting to ensure the way was clear. She sneaked out of the room. Foster followed on her heels, hiding his gun under his coat. Chapter 35. Garbage was the decoration of choice in every corner and crack on the dust-drenched alley. Wallace walked through as if he owned the place. Shoulders back, head held high, and eyes on a swivel. He stepped onto an equally dusty street in a small, sleepy village. A man sat in a doorway as he strummed a guitar. Wallace nodded, and the man nodded back. The burrito stand was a piece of plywood resting on 2 sawhorses, the ingredients under a couple of mesh screens and damp towels. It almost tipped over when Wallace leaned against it. He kept it from small with one hand and laughed. Hola, ¿dónde estás? He said to the small teen girl, who shuffled behind the table to check on the ingredients. Trace, Wallace held up 3 fingers. He licked his lips as she slathered beans and beef on a tortilla, sprinkled in peppers and onions. He didn't pay attention to the clucking sound behind him, or notice the guitar man stop playing and move further down the street. Maddie stood behind Wallace and glanced over her shoulder at the rooftop further down. Foster peered over the edge and watched them both. She smiled and took 2 steps up to the back of Wallace as he takes a huge bite out of the first burrito. She put the tip of her finger against the back of his head and whispered, "Bang!" Wallace jumped, dropped the plate of burritos. The vendor backed away, her eyes the size of saucers. Wallace gagged, lurched for Maddie as she stepped aside. He held both hands to his throat, choking. He lashed out in panic, punched himself in the stomach but couldn't breathe. Maddie studied his movements. Most people panic when they choke. The lack of air shuts down the reasoning center and goes straight into lizard brain survival mode. The brain can function 3 minutes or so without oxygen, so if a person remained calm while choking, they could reason out how to dislodge the obstruction and live. Everybody panics when they choke. Wallace fell to his knees. Death by natural causes, she said to him, always looks cleaner. 2 puffs of dirt erupted by her feet, followed by the sound of 2 quick pops in the air. She motioned with her finger to the roof and turned Wallace around. She grabbed him around the midsection and gripped her hands under his diaphragm. She glanced up at Foster, who made a hurry-up motion with his pistol. She jerked her fists up and back once, twice. Wallace coughed out the chunk of burrito and collapsed to the ground as he tried to catch his breath. Scared you? He nodded. Ready for a lesson? Be aware of your surroundings. Always. No exceptions. He glared at her and struggled to his knees. Who sent you? You're too dumb to work for me. I get the job done, he said. So I hear. Who sent you? He climbed to his feet and checked the small of his back. His gun was still there. Doesn't matter. I'm here. For how long? She asked. As long as I am, Foster said from behind her. He walked past her and flanked Wallace so they both were facing her. Maddie studied them both, sizing up angles and speed. She knew Foster was studying her back, and he had more experience. More years too, yes, but that didn't necessarily mean he was slow on the draw. Do you want us to finish the job? He asked. I'm only here to make sure the job is done. I know him. I know him too. Well enough, she said. The standoff lasted for a minute longer, then Maddie smiled. It lit up her face and made her look like a different person. Still hungry? She asked Wallace and walked away. The men watched her go as she headed back in the direction of the hotel. Careful of her, warned Foster. You better believe it, Wallace answered. Chapter 36. The fake flames of a faux fireplace flickered in the executive lounge at the airport terminal. Wallace and Foster sat in 2 plush leather chairs, their backs to the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the tarmac. They faced a wall made of glass, tinted so they could look out on the terminal walkway at the people passing by, mirrored so those same people couldn't look in. The best thief in the world looks just like you or I, Foster instructed Wallace, as the muscular man beside him stuffed a candy bar into his mouth. Foster sipped a demi-tasse of espresso and waited for him to swallow before he answered. But we're not thieves. Sure we are. Foster set the cup onto the saucer. He smiled at the attendant, who fluttered by to pick it up, and nodded at her offer of a second. We don't steal items, he said after she left. We steal lives. Observe that gentleman. He nodded to the row of public payphones on the wall across the terminal. The man in question was dressed in an Armani suit, impeccably tailored. He stood at the phone banks, gesturing with his hands as he shouted into the phone. They couldn't hear him, but they could see his lips moving. What do you think about him? He's a thief. You're just guessing, Foster chided. He took the proffered cup from the attendant as she returned and blew across the top of the steaming coffee. Study him, he instructed. What can you tell me? Wallace sat up in the chair and nibbled some chocolate of the tip of his thick thumb. He's not in a hurry. He's yelling at someone on the phone. Nice haircut. Luggage must be checked because all he's got is that briefcase. I can't see his hands because he keeps moving them around. No, that's good, said Foster. Very good work. Now watch. He tipped up the cup and emptied the espresso. On the other side of the terminal, the businessman set his briefcase on the floor beside another briefcase belonging to a second man who hunched against the payphones, trying to ignore his more vocal companion. As they watched, the businessman laughed into the phone, hung it up and reached down. He picked up the other briefcase beside his and walked away. That was pretty good, said Wallace. It was excellent, said Foster. He shifted up, out of his seat. Except he robbed our mark. Wallace scrambled up and started after the robber. Foster grabbed his arm and pulled him back. Slowly. He led Wallace out of the executive lounge, and they excused themselves as they pushed through a passing throng of people. Foster tapped the second man on the shoulder. He was in his 60s, a permanent scowl scarred into his wrinkled visage. "Excuse me, sir," Foster said. "Someone stole your briefcase." The man glanced down at his feet and kicked over the businessman's briefcase. "Damn it." Foster tugged on his sleeve. "We were over there and saw it happen." "Why didn't you stop him then?" "He went this way." Foster pulled the sleeve into the opposite direction. "Maybe we can still catch him." He led the man down a corridor, away from the direction the thief escaped. Foster tugged him into a bathroom. "Let's check in here." He opened the last bathroom stall. The gentle grip on his sleeve clamped down like a vice and spun him into the tile wall. The man bounced off with a small cry and pressed back against it. Foster glanced at Wallace by the door. He nodded. Foster pulled a pistol from a shoulder holster and shot the man twice in the head. He reached in, arranged the fallen body, and positioned the wound over the toilet. There was just a spray of blood against the wall. "Lock it," he instructed, and took up Wallace's position by the door. The muscular man went into the stall, twisted the lock, and vaulted over the top. No one would discover the body until it started to stink. Chapter 37. The hotel room wasn't as expensive or as opulent as she had grown accustomed to, but Maddie made do. She luxuriated under the steaming stream of scalding water in the shower and drifted out of the bathroom in an exhale of fog. She settled on the bed next to a rucksack of her possessions, the only thing she had brought on this trip to make sure the job was done. She rooted around and pulled out the picture of her and Brill from her office still in the frame and stared at it. She traced an elegantly manicured nail around his face. "Brill," she sighed. Chapter 38. Brill stared into the fire. His shoulder ached, and he shifted, trying to relieve some of the pressure. It wasn't the first time he had been shot, and if he lived through this one, it might not be the last. Hazard of the job, he thought. He wanted antibiotics, though. The jungle was not the place to have a wound, and even though the bandages were changed back at the camp, sweat dripped off his body and soaked through the gauze. Not an ideal environment. He loved the jungle, though, the heat, the mystery. He considered the bush his home, his birthing ground. And though he had operated in every environment imaginable on the planet, there were two places that called to him: the jungle and the desert. He shifted again and nudged the sleeping form of Ron with his foot. Her eyes popped open, and she sat up with bleary eyes. "What?" "Someone's coming." He nodded toward the cave opening and tried to stand up. A squad of 6 federales stepped into the cave, the firelight gleaming off the oily sheen of their AK-47 rifles. They wore bandanas over their faces, camouflage colors that matched the tiger stripe pattern on their surplus uniforms. "Damn," she said. Chapter 39. Memories are funny things that come and go like the hint of the wind. Sparked by a smell or sound or taste, the brain travels back in time to a place that no longer exists, and a moment captured like a photograph. Brill sat in the back of the rocking military transport, the breeze on his face full of jungle smells, and the only sound the roaring of the diesel engine as it puttered up the muddy road. He remembered Bern. The city in Switzerland was clean and industrial, modern lines shoving at the edges of history and pushing it back into the shadowed side streets. One of the skyscrapers had a penthouse office occupied by a small firm that financed arms deals to Africa. One of those men stood in front of him in the elevator. He gave Brill the once-over as he stepped in and dismissed him as just another salesman. Plain and simple in a gray suit, white shirt, and blue tie. Easily Forgettable. "Hold the door, please," she called in Swiss German. A beautiful woman rushed across the lobby floor. The man reached out to shove the close button, but she scampered inside, catching the automatic safety feature by waving her palm between the closing doors. She shot him a glare as he leered. "Glad you could make it," he shrugged. The man was dumpy and rotund. His suit was expensive but wrinkled and stained, as if he wore it days on end, and he smelled of cheap cologne and bad decisions. His head wobbled as he studied her legs moving up to her bottom and then her chest. The elevator dinged on the 16th floor, and the blonde stepped out. "Asshole," she muttered. "What can I say?" he called after her. "You're gorgeous." The doors whisked closed, and the man glanced over his shoulder at Brill. I mean, she was gorgeous. Brill lifted a silenced pistol from under his coat and shot him in the head twice. He reached forward, pressed all the buttons, and got out on the next floor. He walked over to the stairwell door and shoved it open. Before it closed, he could hear the screaming from one floor up as the bloody body was discovered. Chapter 40. He had been in prisons before, worse places than this one, but not by much. The walls were stone, carved from the ground and stacked to form a hovel with bars, a simple square block construction that relied on gravity and cheap mortar to keep standing. There were 2 rows of 3 cells along either side, a large jail for such a small little village. Brill surmised they must do a brisk trade in drunk tourists or jungle workers who frequented the bars and whorehouses on the weekends. The smell was atrocious. Urine and vomit lent credence to the drunk tank theory, and stains of indeterminate origin kept him from investigating too closely. His shoulder ached. There were no benches in the cell, so he and Ron sat on the least filth-encrusted portion of the floor and leaned against the cold stone wall. They watched a brave rat move from one cell across the hall and under the bars into theirs. It showed no sign of fear. Brill knew they wouldn't get much sleep, if any at all. A rat that brave would have friends, and those friends would start eating what they could grab off sleeping prisoners. He clenched his fist, partially to protect his fingers, and suppressed a groan as he shifted. "I would ask how you feel," Ron whispered. "But considering the circumstances..." "I feel like I've been shot," he grunted. "You look it. This. I spent hours working on this casual, cool, blood-soaked look. It's all the rage in Milan." She nodded. "I pegged you for a fashionista," she almost grinned. "It was the poncho, wasn't it? Tourist trap couture." One of the federales, a thin man with a mustache so thick it looked responsible for the bowing of his head that gave him the appearance of a culture, leaned around the bar and made a kissing sound at them. "I think you have an admirer," Brill nodded. "So long as he stays on his side of the bars," she said. The jailer pulled a ring of keys off his belt and jangled them as he leered. Ron scooted closer to Brill, helping to prop him up against the wall. He glared at the guard. The federale didn't back down. After all, he had a gun and probably buddies out in the front. But he didn't come into the cell, either. Brill chalked it up as a win. Chapter 41. The waves crashed in from the Pacific in long rolling swells that climbed up to 5 feet and washed up onto the sand. The beach was mostly private, except for a few surfers carving the water and several small groups scattered in small clumps. Foster and Wallace stood on the dune and watched the people. They had driven straight through to the small beachside community where the safe house was hidden and checked into a hotel on the edge of town. He wasn't here, they knew, not yet. It was only a matter of time, and with such a small population, he would be easy to find. Foster snorted. "See him?" He nodded, and Wallace followed the start to a corpulent man wallowing in the shallows. "How could I miss?" "Study him," Foster advised. "Study what?" "He's a small whale. A man in our line of work must guard against that." Anyone ever tell you that you're obsessed with size? His reflexes are slow. His breathing is labored. He stands out where you always want to blend in and be forgettable. I don't think your accent is that forgettable. Like this. Foster switched to a plain Middle American accent. Or maybe this one. He shifted to a Southern drawl. Neat trick, Wallace raised an eyebrow. You need a few more tricks in your toolbox. I get the job done. It's more than a job. It's an art form. That's the difference between you and him. He was an artist. What happened? Foster sighed. She did. Who? Our employer. She happened. She distracted him. The distraction made him slow, and it cost him. What did it cost? His life, said Foster. He turned around and stared across the street. Maddie leaned against the wall of a building, half hidden in the shadows, and waved with one hand. Chapter 42. The Federale was back. This time, he brought a friend. The second guard was twice his size in the waist, but only had mustache half as thick. There was a rule somewhere, maybe in the Third World Country Regulation Handbook, that all authority figures must have a mustache. Why else would so many grow them? Ron huddled against Brill as Half-Stash took the keys from the first Federale and unlocked the door. He motioned to his companion, who lifted a rifle, chambered a round, and pointed it through the bars. Half-Stash approached with a grin. He grabbed Ron and jerked her off the floor and pressed her against the wall. Brill reached up, grabbed his wrist, and twisted. Bones popped, and the man screamed. Brill leveraged Half-Stash between the rifle and Ron as he scrambled up. The Federale outside shouted and yelled, but couldn't get a clear shot. Chapter 43. The front door to the jail slipped open, and Johnson eased his bulk through just as the screaming started. The two guards dozing behind the desk jumped, skittered between the shouts from the hall and the new visitor at the door. Timing was a bitch. Howdy, partners, Johnson waved with his left hand. One of the young guards pulled his pistol and wavered back and forth, hall door, hall door. Johnson reached his left hand into his pocket and pulled out a thick roll of $100 bills. Both guards stopped skittering, transfixed by more money than they would see in their lifetime. Johnson held out the money roll. The second guard took a step toward him. He pulled a silenced pistol in his right hand from behind his back and shot the guards in the head with two muted pops. Surprise, Johnson grinned. He shoved the roll back into his pocket and went down the hall to investigate. Johnson saw the backside of the Federale wiggling against the bar as the man reached the tip of the rifle barrel around, searching for a clear shot. He never turned around as Johnson slid down the hall and eased up next to him to press the end of the pistol to his temple. Little pig, Johnson chuckled and pulled the trigger. The Federale dropped like a puppet with the strings cut. The rifle clattered to the floor. Brill slammed Half-Stash into the bars and bounced his head off the metal. He shoved him through the open door, and Johnson finished him off. The giant man peered through the bars and grinned. Ready for a rematch? Chapter 44. The truck rumbled through the jungle, heading east. It was another military transport, which seemed to be the second most preferred mode of transportation after the VW in this part of Mexico. Brill and Ron sat in the back, unbound but bunched together. Two balaclava-wearing commandos in all-black BDUs were seated at posts on either side of the back gate, watching the dirt road slide by underneath them. Johnson sat by the one on the right, facing Brill and smiling. I knew it was you, as soon as his goons busted in. I tell you, that was some piece of work. Beautiful. He made a gun with his finger and his thumb and clicked it twice. Through the window. I couldn't believe it, he continued. You know, I was sent to stop you. I kept waiting for some gringo to come waltzing in with a violin case in hand, ready to mow down every breathing thing that got in the way. I should have known. Johnson reached down to a duffel bag between his feet under the seat and rooted around without looking. He grinned even bigger when he found what he wanted and pulled out a half-empty bottle of mezcal. Join me. He unscrewed the top and tipped it back for 2 large swallows, then held the bottle out toward them. Ron shook her head no, but Brill grimaced as he sat up and took a swig before passing it back. The smooth liquor burned a little going down, but the warm feeling it created in his stomach spread slowly and eased the ache in his shoulder. You hold it well. I never could have made a shot like that, Johnson admired. He took another long swallow. I got to know something, though. Did you let me win? Wait, don't answer that. I like to think I did that, all on my own. I've been looking for you since D.C. You did a good job there, too. Did you hear they finally ruled it a suicide? An expert panel couldn't tell. Even I couldn't tell, and I knew you did it. Brill leaned back against the cab of the truck and waited. He watched Johnson with veiled eyes. That's why they sent me after you. The director and senator were worried. Too many potential suicides, huh? Johnson laughed again. He clapped one of the commandos on the shoulder and almost knocked him out of the back of the truck. The man could have killed with the look, but Johnson ignored him or didn't notice. I wouldn't have found you but for her little group. These small-time revolutionaries like to think they're big bad warriors, he snorted. A tiny splinter under one fingernail, and they tell you where their mama lives. You were easy to find. Who shot you? No matter. He pushed past the commando and peered out into the jungle. It's not far now. Johnson settled his bulk back onto the narrow bench and screwed the cap back on the tequila bottle before stowing it in his bag. The transport slammed on its brakes and skidded to a stop. Johnson and the commandos lost their balance and shifted forward. The big man's fingers scrambled for purchase on the bars of the bed walls. Brill rolled forward and slammed his good shoulder into one of the commandos, knocking him out of the truck. He grabbed the second one's gun, flipped it, and shot the man. Johnson recovered quickly and pawed his pistol out. He twisted to aim at Brill and found himself staring down the barrel of the rifle. Shit, muttered Ron. A bullet cracked out of the jungle and split open the head of the commando in the road as he struggled to rise. Brill shifted so his back wasn't to the open gate. Reek, Ron squealed as her friend stepped out of the fringe of the jungle on one side of the road. Johnson slid over the side of the truck and fell to his feet. Brill shot but missed. Johnson took off for the thick foliage that lined the road, zigging and zagging in speed that defied his bulk. He raised the shoulder over his pistol and squeezed off 4 shots as he ran. They were wild, but had the desired effect of making everyone duck so they couldn't shoot back. Brill emptied the clip into the leaves where the big man disappeared. Come on. Scooter yelled and dragged Enrique up from the road where he cowered. Brill dropped over the side of the truck and yanked the quivering driver out. He smashed his head with the rifle. Move, he shouted. Ron jumped out of the truck and followed him into the cab. Brill slumped over the wheel, working to catch his breath. The activity drained away the solace of the tequila and brought back the dull ache that threatened to overtake him. Dana jumped on the runner. We stole a jeep. We have to go, said Brill. He dropped the truck in gear. Wait, screamed Ron. He's out there and he won't miss, Brill warned. She looked from Brill to Dana and back again. She couldn't leave her friends and fellow fighters to be picked off by the big man. Get in, she yelled to Scooter as she moved over and motioned Dana in beside her. Scooter shoved Enrique over the gate and leaps in behind him as Brill jammed the accelerator and rocketed down the potholed jungle road as fast as the path would allow. Chapter 45. Ron reached around and opened the sliding glass window set in the back of the truck cab. She shoved her torso through the opening and hugged Scooter in one arm, Enrique with the other. "Tell her nothing," slurred Enrique, still groggy. "Reek," Dana chastised him. "It's still Ron." He glared from Dana to Ron and back again, his eyes finally settling on the back of Brill's head in the cab. "She's still with him." "He's not one of them." "He's not one of us," said Enrique. "Who is he with?" "I don't know yet," said Ron as she pulled herself back into the cab. "But he's with us for now." Chapter 46. Brill gripped the wheel with both hands and concentrated on the road. His eyes were bleary, but his breathing was slow and deliberate. 4 count in, 4 count hold, 4 count out, 4 count hold. Again and again, until the pain in his shoulder subsided. The shot had bruised the side of his body, and the constant abuse over the past 20 hours was making it worse. He wasn't sure if the bullet nicked bone, but the muscles tore more every time he moved his arm, which made the purple and yellow splotches under his skin grow more. He was going to need a long break when they got free. "Where are we going?" Ron gasped next to him. He glanced over. She was pretty calm for a student under fire. A thought tugged at the edge of his consciousness, but a pothole dislodged it as he caught his breath. "North," he grunted. "You're bleeding." "Again." "I'll be fine." Ron scooted across the seat and slammed her foot on the brakes. Scooter slid in the back of the truck bed and banged his head against the window. "Ow," he howled. "Sorry, Scoot, get in here," she called through the glass. "You're bleeding," she said to Brill. "You might die, and if you die while driving, I might die. I'm not ready for that." Scooter opened the door. "What's up, boss?" "Shift him over." She dragged Brill to the passenger door and hopped over him to be in the middle of the seat. "Drive," she commanded Scooter. The truck lurched into gear and grumbled forward. Ron peeled open Brill's shirt and grimaced. "You ripped the stitches." "I know it hurts." "Scooter, give me your shirt." Scooter contorts behind the wheel and hands his sweat-stained shirt to her. Ron folded it up and pressed it against the wound to staunch the bleeding. "We have to ditch the truck," said Brill. "Relax," said Scooter. "We're not amateurs. We've done this before." He slammed on the brakes. The truck fought for traction on the loamy road. Ron slid forward and banged her head on the plastic dashboard. "Damn it, Scooter." She glared at him, then noticed his stare, mouth open as he took in the road in front of them. Ron glanced up the road. A nest of guns aimed at the cab of the truck, dozens of federales lined from tree line to tree line. "They got us, man," Scooter started hyperventilating. "We're going to prison. They got us. We have to give up." Dana tapped on the glass. Enrique lifted 2 assault rifles, hidden by the back of the cab. "Hand me a rifle," Brill said through the open glass. He creaked the passenger door open. "Tell them we surrender," he instructed Scooter. "Get in the floorboard." He used his other hand to push Ron down toward the floorboard behind the protection of the big block engine. Scooter held up both hands so the soldiers could see through the windshield. "We surrender," he called in Spanish. "We surrender." Enrique slid a rifle to Brill, hidden by the open door. "Get down," said Brill. He swung out of the cab, partially blocked by the door, and began firing in calm, deliberate shots. Pop, 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 pop. 5 federales fall before the rest, thing to return fire. Ron squeezed into a small ball on the floorboard of the truck as bullets pinged and cracked off the hood and windshield. Brill drops to the ground and rolls under the truck to the driver's side, firing between the tires as he goes. The soldiers keep dropping. They aim at the passenger door and pepper it with bullets. The ground in front of the truck erupts in geysers of dust. Enrique pops up over the top of the cab and opens fire. He's not as precise or as deliberate as Brill, but with an automatic it really didn't matter. The lines of soldiers collapsed. Survivors loped for the protection of the jungle. Brill aimed carefully from under the truck and dropped them. The jungle grew quiet. Clouds of cordite made a gun-smoke-scented fog over the road. Brill stood up as he scanned the road ahead of them. Enrique leaned over the truck bed and smiled. "Amigo," he congratulated Brill. His chest exploded, spraying red mist across the olive paint on the truck cab. Brill dropped behind the wheel of the truck, searching for the shooter. Johnson ran from the jungle and slid behind the rear wheel on the opposite side of the truck. Brill extracted the clip and checked. He was empty. He glanced around and spied Enrique's rifle near the rear tire on his side. He peeked around the edge of the tire, saw Johnson's shoulder, and lunged for the rifle. Johnson pounced around the back of the truck and slammed his foot on the rifle just as Brill's fingers closed around the stock. Brill looked up into the barrel of a Glock aimed at his face. "Goddamn, you're good," Johnson grinned. "Shelby warned us about you." He nodded toward the carnage up the road. "The rest of you, out of the truck." Ron slid out of the cab and landed on shaky legs. "Where's the other one?" Johnson kept his pistol on Brill. "Dead," Ron sobbed. "Bring him out." She reached back into the truck and hauled Scooter's bullet-riddled corpse from the seat of the truck. It flopped on the ground with a wet thunk. "What about that one?" Johnson nodded to the truck bed. Ron stood on a step and peered into the bed. Dana lay in a ball, eyes closed. Ron reached for her. "Dana." "No hands," Johnson warned. Ron bowed her head. Dana didn't move. "Her too," she whispered. Johnson watched her for a moment and shook his head. "Too bad." Johnson glared at Brill. His finger tightened on the trigger. "We could play for it," said Brill. "Why delay the inevitable?" The fat man took a deep breath. The lines on his knuckles grew white. Brill shifted as the shot rang out. The bullet ripped into the body of the truck. "Son of a bitch," Johnson gasped. Brill kicked his knee, knocked him off balance. Johnson recovered, brought the pistol to bear as Brill struggled to twist the rifle around. Bullets slammed into Johnson and knocked him flat. Dana sat up and kept firing until the hammer on her pistol clicked dry. Ron reached up and took the pistol from her. "You got him, honey. It's okay." Ron pulled a magazine from her waist and reloaded the pistol. She knelt next to Brill and checked his blood-covered torso. "Good thing you kept him distracted," she winced. The wound was open wider, blood cascading down his ribcage. Dana dropped in the dust next to Ron and took over. "If you were a horse, I think we would have to put you down." She checked a second wound in his leg where a bullet had carved out a chunk of meat. "Ron, rip some bandages from Enrique's shirt," said Dana, her voice catching on his name. "We need to keep moving," grunted Brill. "You need a hospital," said Dana. She used the strips of cloth to bind the wounds and stop the bleeding. "You're going into shock. You need plasma and antibiotics." Dana checked a couple of the federales for a clean shirt and stripped one of the bodies. The cloth had blood on it, but it was the least stained among them. She helped Brill slip into the shirt. "No hospital," he groaned. "I have supplies." "Where are we going?" "North," said Ron. "We're going north." Her voice was hollow and sad. "What's north?" Dana asked, as she lifted Brill and put his uninjured arm over her shoulder. She helped him to one of the Federale jeeps, parked on the other side of the carnage, spread across the road. "Someplace safe," he said as she spilled him into the back seat. "Baja. Head for Baja." Ron collected 3 rifles and 6 magazines and put them in the floorboard next to him. "Should we bury them?" she motioned to the bodies of Enrique and Scooter. Dana sniffed twice, and a dam broke somewhere inside of her. Tears slid down her cheeks and dropped on her dirt-stained t-shirt. "We don't have time," she sobbed. Ron put an arm around her and drew her in close. She held her for a moment, then pushed her toward the passenger seat. "I'll drive," she said. She started the Jeep and pulled under the jungle canopy. Dana fished around in the back floorboard and pulled one of the rifles in her lap. She wanted to be prepared, just in case. Chapter 47. I wondered when you got here. Foster sipped a cup of coffee at a cafe table on the patio. He was in the gunslinger's seat, the chair with a back to the wall, and a full view of the street down to the ocean. Wallace sat on one side of the table, legs stretched across a second chair as he sipped on a large glass of tea. Maddie pulled out the chair opposite Wallace and sat with her back angled toward the wall. It still left her vulnerable to Foster, and he could tell she felt it. Her head was on a constant swivel, scanning the street and back at them. "I've been watching," she said. The small waitress came over and took her drink order, coffee, and returned quickly with a cup to match Foster's. "Maybe he went somewhere else," said the man. "Does he have a place we aren't aware of?" "He doesn't go anywhere else," she said as she took dainty sips. Wallace slurped the bottom of the cup and set it on the table. "He's probably dead." Foster glanced at his protégé and shook his head. "He's not dead." "I don't know. I winged him pretty good." Maddie snorted. "Wing does not work on this guy. You have to nail him dead on. Even then, you can't be sure." Foster turned his scrutiny to her, light dawning in his crinkled eyes. "Is that why you retired?" Maddie shrugged and studied the bottom of her coffee cup. Chapter 48. The flea market in the small village at the base of the Alps was crowded. Bright splashes of colorful awnings dotted the town square, as thousands of people milled about from vendor to table vendor. The smell of roasting nuts and beer was in the air from stalls set up several hundred yards apart. Brill rode a bicycle to the edge of the crowd and locked it to a bike rack before diving into the throng. He was younger, dressed like a poor student, with scruffy hair, a goatee, and worn backpack over one shoulder. No one paid him a second glance. He moved with deliberation through the crowd, searching. His eyes locked on a tall man with graying hair, and Brill fell in step behind them, separated by several dozen people. It gave him time to study him. He was lean to the point of emaciation, but wore an expensive suit. His hawkish features and narrow nose gave him the look of a predator, which Brill thought was made more poignant by a possessive hand he kept on the shoulder of a young blonde girl beside him. The tall man steered her through the crowd, controlling. She looked young. Brill knew she was 17 to the tall man's 52. He tailed them as the man steered her out of the crowd and to an old office building converted into small apartments. The man pulled her into a doorway and roughly kissed her. Brill slipped into a second doorway across the way and further up to watch. The street was almost empty, except for a rotund man waddling up the cobblestone sidewalk and a woman padding in his wake. He did a double take. "Maddie." He ducked his head and let them pass by, then slipped out of the doorway and stalked them. The rotund man turned into a narrow side street, and Maddie followed. Brill paused at the corner and peeked around the edge. She was leaning against the wall. "Pardon, monsieur," she called. The man stopped and stared at her. She wore a short dress with a low cut on the bosom and leaned forward. It was an effective distraction. His breath came quickly as he stared. "Help, please," she continued. The man waddled toward her. He got within arm's reach, and Maddie pulled out a pistol. She shot him in the stomach. He gasped and fell, gripping his insides that spilled out across the dirty stones. He started moaning, and she kicked him in the head. Maddie leaned down and pulled his wallet from a jacket pocket. It looked like a robbery gone bad. She slid the wallet and pistol back into her small purse and turned. Brill stood at the end of the alley, smiling. "Sweetheart," he said. Maddie froze. "You saw." It wasn't a question. Her eyes darted around the narrow street and over his shoulder. They were alone now, but in the city they wouldn't stay undiscovered for long. "It's not what you look like." She marched toward him, one hand in her purse. He nodded. "Let me show you something." He held out his hand. She studied it for a second, then grabbed it and followed along. Brill led her to a 3-story apartment building with a front door propped open. They went up to the 3rd floor, where he used a key to unlock a room. It was empty, except for a table set up beside a dormer window. All the other windows had thick sheets draped over them, but for the one by the table, a rifle rested on the surface. He pulled her over to the window. Across the street, they could see into another 3rd-floor apartment. The tall man strutted around inside, naked. The young girl is curled up in a ball on the floor. Brill scooped up the rifle and set it to his shoulder. "I'm not judging you," he said as he drew in breath and sighted. "I don't have the right." He tightened his finger. "I'm relieved, actually, because now we can share." He squeezed off a round. The shot cracked out, and the man in the apartment collapsed. Maddie peeked over his shoulder. "You missed," she observed. "He's still alive. The girl's mother is his sister. This has been going on for 3 years. She wanted him paralyzed, not dead." Maddie nodded as the young girl's scream sounded through the shattered glass. "You know about me. I know about you," she said. She grabbed his lapel and pulled him in close until their lips were lightly touching. "What a pair we make," he sighed and leaned into a kiss. "I'm trying to forget you," she said. "Is it working?" He pressed his lips into hers. She opened her mouth and kissed him back. It might have gone on forever, tiptoeing into interesting places, but sirens interrupted them. He opened his eyes to find her staring at him. She pulled away, holding his lip between her teeth. "Does it hurt?" she muttered. He shook his head and smiled as well as he could. "It will." She bit down hard. He jerked his head back, blood spattered her cheek. "Damn it, Maddie," he grunted. She shot him with the pistol from her purse. 2 quick shots into the chest. He fell back onto the floor of the empty apartment. Blood leaked onto the hardwood from under him. "I loved you, you know." The sirens stopped right under the open dormer window. Maddie glanced out and hurried out of the apartment to find the back stairs. Outside, she rounded the corner almost a block away and watched. The confused policeman rushed around from the dead body in the alley to the tall man's apartment. Another set skid to a stop and rushed into the building she had just left. She knew they would find a 3rd body inside. Chapter 49. Maddie set her empty coffee cup down and motioned to the waitress for another. They waited until she had brought a 2nd round for each of them. 2 slugs point blank, she said to Foster. "How did he do it?" He shrugged and sipped with one hand. The other he kept on his waist, fingers touching his holster. "How did he do it in Dublin? Rio? Algiers? Tokyo? Is he a cat?" Wallace snorted. "He would be through those 9 by now," said Foster. "He isn't ready to die. He doesn't have a choice. Not if I have anything to do with it." "You were very effective the first time." Maddie took a sip. "I was as effective as you were," Wallace shifted. "I learn from my mistakes." "As do I," she said. "Hence you." "How did you know you had failed?" asked Foster. She stared back at his cold, calculating eyes. Word got around he was still operating. "Did you hear about Hong Kong?" She shook her head. It was shortly after your encounter in Lucerne. He was contracted by one syndicate to hit another. Mako, she sucked in her breath. Wallace sat up in the chair. I heard of him. His bodyguard. Made Bruce Lee look like a Girl Scout, sniffed Wallace. No offense. Maddie ignored him. That was him. I wondered what made him so angry, Foster sighed. Chapter 50. Hong Kong doesn't really have a night. The sun sets and the sky grows dark, but the glow of a million neon lights push back the darkness and wash the cityscape in rainbow-colored kaleidoscope. There are no stars in Hong Kong, unless you count the movie and pop variety. Giant buildings scrape the sky, monuments to money and achievement. Their windows glow and sparkle at night, some as the tapestry for video commercials that blare over the roar of motors and honking horns. A long black Mercedes pulled into a circular drive at one of the high-rise buildings. It stopped 20 feet from the glass doorways at the end of a set of marble steps. Fountains and topiary lined the walkway. A whipcord thin muscle man stepped out of the front passenger side and scanned the grounds. He looked like a predator, eyes roaming over the concourse to the street and back. His working name was Ching, though it was not the name he was born with. It was given to him by his employer, Mako, one of the most dangerous gang leaders in Southeast Asia. Satisfied, he knocks on the rear window. A tiny gnome of a man exits the back door. He's dressed in an expensive suit that hangs off his narrow frame, his wizened features hosting a scowl. Mako glanced at Ching, who nodded. Two more bodyguards exit the car and surround the small man. They march toward the glass doors. Ching grabbed Mako and pulled him behind a marble column. 6 maintenance workers cleaning the windows jerked Uzis out of their buckets and sprayed the walkway. The 2 bodyguards jerked and twitched as bullets stitched patterns across their bodies and chipped up pieces of the walkway. Ching leaned around the column, cracked off 2 shots and dropped 2 assassins. The remaining 4 rushed them, using cover fire to keep Ching and Mako huddled behind the pole. Ching launched his pistol at one and jumped among them. He lashed out with hands and feet and legs, moving almost too fast for the eye to follow. Bones crack, joints pop, and men screamed. He grabbed a dropped gun before it hit the ground and shot them with 4 fast clicks. Ching grabbed Mako and rushed him into the building. Across the street, Brill watched the entire exchange that took less than 2 minutes. He had provided the guns for the team of street thugs that lay dead in the walkway, had hired them for the job. The cost was cheap, labor being what it was in Southeast Asia, and it provided him with information. Now he knew just how good the bodyguard was, and if the men had succeeded, he would still get paid. The men who hired him only cared about the result of Mako being dead. They weren't concerned with making it look like something it was not. But the street gang failed. Now the bodyguard would be on high alert. Brill played out the scenarios in his head, what he would do, how he would react. He had been hired to protect clients before, but not often enough that his mindset was in defensive mode. He was made for offense, fast and dirty. It was his training from Africa. No distinctive sirens added their wail to the noise from the neighborhood. The gang must have the cops in pocket here, which was no surprise. Bribery was a way of life in Hong Kong. Brill padded across the walkway past the dead bodies and through the glass doors. Mistake. The bodyguard should have locked the front doors behind him. In his haste to get Mako to safety, he had overlooked a simple line of defense. It meant he wasn't thinking clearly. He was rattled, an added benefit of the street gang attack. Brill would bet he forgot a few other things as well. He skipped the elevator and moved to the stairwell, jogged up the flights of stairs. It was 50 flights, so he took it slow but steady, eating up the steps with a methodical pace. The muscles in his chest ached after a while, but he ignored the pain. They had been ripped by bullets not too long ago, but he was mending well. He paused outside of the doorway on the 50th floor and listened. It was quiet. He cracked open the door and peeked through. The hallway was empty. Brill sneaked down the corridor to a set of opaque glass doors set into a mahogany wall. Angry Chinese voices yelled on the other side. He slid to one knee and extended his pistol, aimed at the door and waited. Chapter 51. "They're here," said Foster. Maddie started and glanced around. Foster nodded toward a battered jeep that rumbled past them at the edge of the ocean. Wallace shifted out of his seat. "Let's get him." Maddie put her cup on the table. "Tell me the rest of the story," she said. "We don't need the story," Wallace grumbled. He checked his pistol under the table, hidden from prying eyes. "We need to get him while he doesn't suspect." "He always suspects," said Foster. "This is his safe house," Maddie argued. "He doesn't suspect." Foster nodded to Wallace's pistol. "You're not ready for him. Not with that. Try me." "Finish the story," Maddie said. She wasn't looking at Foster, though. Her eyes were locked on Wallace. He could feel the weight of her stare and glanced up. They locked eyes for a moment, taking each other's measure. He squinted and leaned back in his seat. Chapter 52. Brill waited, pistol extended. The voices inside the room still shouted. A hand crashed through the door pane and showered him with glass. It grabbed the gun and jerked it away. Brill rolled backwards as Ching crashed through the rest of the doorway. He kicked. Brill blocked with his forearms. Ching chopped and smashed as two men fought in close quarters. Brill jabbed, kneed. Ching blocked them and punched back. Mako scurried past them and rushed for the elevator. He jammed the call button again and again with a short, thick thumb. The bodyguard and the hitman fought harder in silence, but they were evenly matched. Each punch was dodged, each kick was parried. The elevator dinged, and the doors slid open. 4 hands reached out and jerked Mako inside the elevator. He yelped. Ching glanced over at the sound. Brill landed a punch. It slammed into his chin and knocked Ching out. Brill scooped up his gun and ran for the elevator. He pried the doors open. The car was 1 floor down and falling. Brill leapt into the elevator shaft, firing through the roof as he descended. He landed in a crouch and jerked the access panel open. Mako cowered in one corner of the car, clutched a bleeding shoulder as he mewled in pain and terror. One of the kidnappers was dead, the other stretched for his gun. Brill leaned in and aimed at the wounded man. Ching slammed into his back, and they tumbled through the roof and crashed to the floor. The kidnapper touched his pistol with the tips of his fingers and tipped it into his hand. He gripped the butt and aimed at Mako. Brill and Ching lash out at the same time. Ching breaks his arm in half, Brill snaps his neck. The pistol fell from lifeless fingers. The 2 men scrambled to their feet and faced off. "I can pay more," Mako stammered in broken English. Brill ignores him. Ching lashes out, and they're fighting again. Punches fall, blows rain down, but each is blocked and countered and blocked again. Ching feints, Brill kicks, and something cracks. The bodyguard folds backwards, his shin bone jutting from his leg. Ching fumbled for the gun. Brill kicked his arm, snapped it in half. Ching collapsed in the corner opposite Mako. "I am sorry, master," he bowed his head. Brill knelt and picked up the gun. "Be quick," Mako said. "It is a sign of respect to kill the bodyguard first in their circles." Brill nodded. He aimed at Ching and pulled the trigger, then moved the barrel to Mako and shot him. The elevator stopped on the lobby floor. The doors opened, and a herd of policemen stood outside. They stared at the bloody carnage in the elevator car. A lone lieutenant, braver than the others, stepped into the car and nudged the trapdoor up with the end of his nightstick. "It's locked." None of the officers noticed the stairwell door open or see Brill as he moved across the rear of the lobby and exited the back. Chapter 53. "I don't believe it," said Wallace. Foster shrugged. "It's what he told me. It took a squad to take out that bodyguard and Mako. He always said he was lucky," sighed Maddie. "He's a liar." "We're all liars," said Foster. "Right. So you can't trust what he says." Wallace turned to Maddie. "Like when you shot him. He was wearing Kevlar under his shirt. Had to be. I would have felt it. Then something else. No one is that good." "He's good. And lucky," Foster said. "It's a dangerous combination." "He's still lying. He doesn't brag. For someone who wants him dead, you're very quick to come to his defense." Maddie studied him over the edge of her sunglasses. "I don't underestimate him." "You're scared of him." Foster shoved back from the table, making them both jump. "It's time to close the contract," he said to Maddie. "How do you want to do this?" Chapter 54. The mud-splattered Jeep slid to a stop in front of a ramshackle cabin at the end of a short dirt road off the beachfront strip. A narrow porch runs along the front, weathered boards painted gray by the sun and salt air. It was tiny. 2 small bedrooms off a living room-kitchen combo, and 1 old bathroom. But it was private and close to the sand. "Are you sure this is it?" Ron called to Brill as he dozed in the back of the Jeep. "He gave me this address," said Dana. Ron put a hand on Brill's knee. He jumped with a start. "It's okay, we're here," she reassured him. He glanced around at the surroundings, taking in the cabin, the empty street behind them, and the 2 women in the front. "I'll check it out," he mumbled. Ron pressed him back into the seat. "I'll do it," she said. She slid out of the Jeep and kept a pistol low against her leg. "Key under the mat?" she joked. He nodded. "Really?" "Am I casa, su casa," he said. "Si." "Great," she chuckled. "Cover me." Dana propped an assault rifle in her lap and winked. Ron sneaked up to the door, stepped to one side, and knocked. There was no answer. She lifted the sand-encrusted map, and there it was, a key, just as he said. She unlocked the door and shoved it open, half expecting something or someone to jump out at them. Nothing happened. She moved into the house, and after a moment reappeared. She shrugged at Dana. "It's safe," she called. Dana helped Brill out of the back of the Jeep. "That's why it's called a safe house." Inside, Dana settled Brill into a chair next to the rock fireplace and began searching the kitchen. He leaned back into a comfortable ratty armchair and watched. Ron set her pistol down and examined his wounds. "Move the Jeep around back," he instructed her. "There's a lean-to carport. Under the eaves, there's a coffee can. Bring it to me." Ron nodded and went outside. He listened as the Jeep started up and moved. "There's nothing here," Dana announced. "Go 2 blocks to the market," he said. "Get supplies." Dana reached into the pockets of her fatigues and turned them out. Both empty. She smiled at Brill as he gave her a pained grin back. Ron came back through the door with a rusted tin coffee can. "Give it to Dana," he instructed. She tossed it to Dana. She pried off the lid and spilled a couple of wads of cash into her hand. "Bring bandages," he said. "Anything else?" "Beer. Cold." Ron plopped beside him and began peeling off his shirt. "You must be feeling better if you can bitch about beer," she said. "Give me 4 of them, and I won't feel anything." "I'll hurry," said Dana as she rushed out of the door. "What can I do?" Ron asked. "Help me move this chair," he whispered. She struggled to move the armchair out on the back porch. It faced the ocean, the sounds of crashing waves soothing. The beach was deserted. The back porch was long and empty, covered from the sun by a section of angled tin roof. Brill settled in the chair under the shade and breathed in the salt air. "You're low-key here." Ron studied his relaxed composure as she stood in the doorway. "Don't worry," he said. "We're safe here." "Does it have a shower?" "Glass door on the right." "Do you want one? Are you offering to share?" "Just because you need the help." "I think I'll sit here and soak up the sunset." "Suit yourself," she said. "Nice place." "Gnarly." He listened as she started the shower. Ron stepped out of the shower and wrapped a towel around her torso. She picked up her grimy shorts and filthy shirt and examined them, wrinkling her nose. She washed them in the sink and carried them out to the back porch to hang on the rail. Brill opened one eye to examine her in the towel. "I don't have anything else to wear." "Back bedroom closet. Top shelf." She watched him for a second, then moved inside. Moments later, she reappeared dressed in baggy shorts and a faded t-shirt. She carried a bowl of warm water and 2 rags over to him. "Sure you don't want a shower?" He shook his head. "I'm going to clean you up." She knelt in front of him, wet the rag, and gently dabbed the dirt and caked blood on his shoulder. He flinched. "Sorry," she said. "Don't worry about it." He watched her as she wiped his chest, his stomach, his face. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome." The front door opened, and he tensed. She could feel him coil under her fingers. "It's Dana," she said, and pushed him back into the chair. She watched Dana move into the kitchen and kept wiping his shoulder and arms. Dana walked out with 2 beers in one hand, swigged and opened one with the other. "Ice cold," she said as she held a bottle out to him. It exploded. She screamed. Brill erupted from the chair. He shoved Ron down, flipped the chair over her for protection, and pushed Dana behind the thin porch rail. He rushed into the house. Bullets tracked him as he ran, spitting through the wall in puffs of splintered wood. The windows shattered, covering the floor with broken glass. Brill grabbed a pistol and nestled in next to the fireplace. He checked the clip. The front and back doors were open, swinging in the wind. He dropped to the floor and crawled to a back window. He left a smear of blood across the hardwood from his shoulder and freshly shredded feet and arms. "Ron," he whispered. She whimpered. "Are you hit?" She peeked over the edge of the window sill. "Get down," he warned. Her head moved toward the middle of the window frame. A feminine hand pressed a silenced .22 pistol against the side of her head. Maddie peeked around the edge and hid. "Sweetheart." "Madeline," said Brill. "Darling, you look like shit. It hurts worse than it looks." "Are you going to shoot me?" she teased. "The thought has crossed my mind." "We're coming in," said Maddie. She used Ron as a shield and led her through the open back door. She was good. She kept her torso and legs hidden behind Ron's body and used her bunched-up t-shirt to steer. "If we're in Mexico, do they just call this a standoff?" asked Maddie. Brill kept the pistol aimed in her direction, but his eyes roamed toward the front door. "You're not alone." Maddie smiled. The front door creaked. Brill uncoiled and launched across the room, twisted and spinning. Maddie tracked him with her gun, fired off a shot. Ron slammed an elbow into her captor's gut, bashed the back of her head into Maddie's nose. She jerked the pistol away and skittered after it. She scooped up the pistol and fired 3 rounds through the front door. "There's one in the doorway." Brill leaned against the wall, blood leaking on the floor. Ron started to crawl across the floor to him. "Stay," he said. Maddie snuffled blood and spat. "Almost like you had that planned, darling." Ron aimed a pistol at her. "Do you know how many jobs I did by myself?" Maddie ignored the threat. "But not for you, love." I learned that lesson. Shadowboxer, we have your friend. Brill reacted to the voice like he'd been sliced with a knife. He stared at the empty doorway. Maddie laughed. Dana's dead, said Ron. They can't have her. He means you, idiot, Maddie giggled. They have you in their sights. Ron looked over at Brill. He nodded. She dropped the pistol and raised her hands. Want to trade, said Brill. She walks, I stay. Maddie stumbled over and picked up her gun. She kicked Ron in the stomach. But darling, we have you both. Wallace leaned in the front door. Foster stepped in the back. All three pistols aimed at Brill. You have to be wondering to yourself, can I hit all three? That's what I would be thinking, Wallace grinned. Shut up, warned Foster. I mean, you could get me, maybe her. But all three. Quiet, Foster said again. Do it with dignity. Brill locked eyes with him. Foster had been his mentor once. Now his teacher was standing in front of him, ready to shoot. Brill felt a pang in his stomach. I've seen those eyes before, Maddie laughed. Bam. Wallace shot Foster. He flipped his aim toward Brill, only to find a gun aimed at him. His eyes grew wide as he realized he shot the wrong one first. Brill popped a hole in his forehead. Wallace flopped out of the doorway. Maddie jumped on Brill, riding him down. Her knee jammed into his injured shoulder. She punched away his gun, jammed her pistol into his forehead. I did love you, she clucked. But I'm better. A hole exploded in her chest and sprayed gore all over his head. Maddie slumped across him. He shoved the body aside and sat up. Ron stood in the kitchen next to Foster, his pistol in her trembling hands. She stumbled toward Brill. I thought you said this place was safe. It was. Safe house, she said. It's in the name. Brill looked around at the carnage. 4 bodies, if you counted Dana, on the back porch. One of them half out of the open front door. There were no police local, not really, but a militia operated just outside of town. They would be coming, and they might not ask questions. Frontier justice still worked out here. It used to be. Why did he shoot him? I thought they were partners. CIA. Mole. $500,000 for Foster, $500,000 for me. How could you know that? Brill nodded toward Wallace. I met him once. Long time ago. She helped him up off the floor. We need to go, she said. Get our gear. Pull the bodies inside, he instructed as he limped down the hall. What are you going to do? Shower. He indicated the gunk splattered across his chest and disappeared inside the bathroom. 10 minutes later, the Jeep puttered down the road as 2 SUVs full of militia raced in the direction of the surf shack. Chapter 55. The battered Jeep sat in rush hour traffic on the interstate. A sign up ahead read San Diego. Brill sat in the passenger seat, alert, eyes scanning the snarl of cars. The bandages on his chest are fresh, but his clothes are still dirty from the run through the jungle. Ron gripped the wheel in both hands. You know, you never told me your name, she said. Brill, he held out a hand and they shook. Brill Winger. Ron spied an exit up ahead and pulled onto the shoulder. She passed up the cars and took the ramp, heading toward the desert east of the city. Where are we going? Brill asked. I know a shortcut. They drove in silence for 20 minutes, and Ron turned left onto a dusty, empty road. Do you know what I did in college for a little while? She asked. Revolutionary archaeologist, so I'm guessing political science. Acting, she smiled. I've always been fascinated by actors. Does that come in handy during a revolution? All of the time, she said. But revolution is not my main game. Brill sat up in his seat and watched her. Archaeology, he said. She pulled the Jeep over. I studied out here once, in this general vicinity. Did you know there are entire villages still hidden under the sand? She turned to face him. You are the most amazing creature I've seen in action. Thank you, he said. She leaned over and kissed him with a light peck. Shelby told me to expect it. And I'd get $2 million if you die in the U.S. Brill shoved her back. Ron lifted a pistol and shot him twice. He tumbled backwards out of the jeep and plopped in the sifting desert sand. He didn't move. I told him to get his money ready, she said. I'm a great actress. Ron dropped the jeep in gear and peeled out in a spray of sand. She pulled a U-turn and raced back toward the direction of the freeway. The end.